Good afternoon, and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. Please note all audio lines are muted for the duration of the meeting to minimize background noise. There will be several public comment portions in today's meeting. We will provide you with instructions on how to make a comment at that time. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. With that, I'll turn the call over to Chair Bogwit. Please go ahead.
Welcome, everyone, to the general session of the ISO Board of Governors. Thank you all for attending. We have some important agenda items today. I think we'll start off with roll. Roger.
Thank you, Chair Bogwat. And we'll start with you. Chair Bogwat?
Present.
Governor Borenstein?
Present.
Governor Galitova?
Present.
Vice Chair Leslie?
Present.
Governor Shorey?
Present.
Thank you. All present in a quorum, and we may proceed. Back to you, Chair Bogwat.
Okay, first item on the agenda is public comment, and this is public comment which is not on an agenda item, general public comment. Does anyone have anything to say?
To make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. You will see a message to unmute your line when it is your turn. At that time, please click unmute, then state your name, affiliation, and comment. We do have a caller in queue. Caller, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Great. Good afternoon, folks. This is Arash Agotzian with EDF Renewables. I do like to make a comment towards CAISO's effort on the recent queue reform improvement. We certainly appreciate the amount of work that the team has done going through the stakeholder process, collaborating with the stakeholders to put in place the first round of queue reform. We do appreciate the ongoing efforts as we see across the country. There's a lot of attention on the queue reforms. So once again, thank you, and we look forward to the ongoing efforts on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will note.
At this time, there are no more callers.
Thank you, and I will note for the record that is agenda item number 6 today. So there'll be more discussion on the interconnection process enhancements.
Absolutely. No more public comment. Then I guess we move to the minutes, Roger.
Thank you, Chair Bogwat. Need a motion for the March 17th, 2022 general session minutes for the Board of Governors.
Oh.
Okay. I think we had Angelina move, and we need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Chair Bogwat. And we'll go ahead and take the vote. Chair Bogwat, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Vice Chair Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey?
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Okay. Next, we have the CEO report. Elliot.
Thank you very much, Chair Bogwat and Board of Governors. It's nice to see you today. And I have, as you've seen from my CEO report, quite a few topics to cover today. I am going to start with reliability. And this is obviously an issue, especially as we're getting closer and closer to the summer of 2022, that is becoming of increasing importance. And I think many of you know, just in the last week to 10 days, the level of focus on this topic within the state and I think across the West has escalated. So as we get into summer 2022, and as you'll hear a little bit more today, certainly there have been some elements that have moved positively since last year. As I noted in the CEO report, we've added over 4,000 megawatts of net qualifying capacity since last year, and there has been a concerted effort to put a large amount of additional capacity on the system that certainly made a difference. But at the same time, we've had a number of variables continue to move sort of against us. As I think we know, December was a record-setting snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, but January and February were literally the two driest years on record in California. We continue to have the potential for significant heat and resource volatility. And we've also, since our last snapshot of the reliability picture in California, there has been an increase in the load forecast. for the state. And so we're sitting in a situation where we're still playing some catch-up, I think, inside the state just to get ourselves to a 1 in 10 loss of load expectation. And at the same time, we remain exposed to significant additional weather and resource volatility this summer. I think we all know that our area of highest concern would be September, net peak period, west-wide heat wave would really remain our biggest source of concern. And at the same time, California, like many others across the country, are looking at some of the additional exposures that we're facing, supply chain problems. There we have the solar tariff dispute back to the Department of Commerce. All of these issues have really sort of raised the profile of this topic and continuing to force real concerted effort to stay ahead of the curve. So certainly rotating outages are by no means a foregone conclusion for this summer, but we do remain exposed. And we need to be very diligent on both the supply side and the demand side going into the summer and beyond. Just last week on the 27th of April, we hosted our second reliability readiness roundtable, where we brought together system operators and utilities and resource providers from across the West. I think many of us share that common concern about the supply chain and issues in terms of extreme heat and load volatility. And we're going to continue working very actively with our partners across the West to work to stay communicative and make sure that our infrastructure is in as good a shape as possible going into the summer. We will be doing tabletop exercises and coordinating with utilities inside California and across the West just to make sure that we're as prepared as we possibly can be going into the summer. I'll also just note that on May 1st, we rolled out the new NERC standard emergency alert levels for the ISO. We had traditionally been operating on a different system known as our AWE system. We're now consistent with the NERC standard alert levels. I think that will improve coordination and communication inside California and across the West as well. So obviously reliability is always job number one. You'll hear a bit more about that today, but we certainly appreciate the attention that's being paid to this issue within the state agencies, governor's office, to make sure that we are able to maintain reliability during this very important and challenging transition to a clean energy grid. Turning to other topics, obviously I think for us in sort of at the same time that we're really staying super focused on the reliability picture, we continue to work very hard on the development of the extended day-ahead market, which of course is a part of our longer-term reliability strategy as well. We were very pleased on April 28th to actually release the straw proposal for EDAM. This was an incredible lift. I want to just acknowledge the significant amount of input that we received from stakeholders across the West. I think the team had a tremendous amount of input. They did their very best to try to synthesize that into I think a very clear and coherent initial straw proposal for the market. And we've also delineated those areas where there's going to be continued work to do. We're looking forward to a set of stakeholder meetings on May 25th and 26th, hoping if the COVID situation cooperates to be able to host a combination of in-person and virtual event. But that's going to be a really, really great opportunity for a set of panel discussions to talk and dive more deeply into the design itself, also to get an update on the work of the Governance Review Committee. Of course, that's another very, very important work stream on that topic. And we're just going to have a comment period open through June 16th. And then after that, the team will take all the comments, try to synthesize them into a subsequent version, then get back to work with work groups and stakeholders to continue the design work across the spring and summer. So thank you both obviously to the team here in the ISO, but equally important to all the folks across the West who really leaned in for many, many, many hours of stakeholder meetings to get us to that important milestone. At the same time that we continue to evolve the EDAM design, there are a set of other important initiatives that have key pieces of connectivity to our day-ahead market and are also key pieces of our overall market design. We released a couple weeks ago the day-ahead market enhancements proposal for the imbalanced reserve product, so that's now on the street. Looking forward to feedback on that. We continue to make progress on the resource sufficiency evaluation, a very, very foundational issue to the trust and the general level of confidence that market participants are showing up with sufficient capacity to participate in the market. We are looking forward at the end of this month to release the initial straw proposal for our long-term solution for the wheel-through issue, another absolutely foundational issue for many of our partners across the West, and then work getting kicked off here in the next few days on price formation. All of those topics have important interdependencies and interconnectivity to the overall design of our market, and we're really trying to think of them in an integrated and conceptually aligned basis so that they can all come together to a truly clean and implementable design. As you'll hear shortly, I'm going to have another opportunity to update you on the development of the ISO's 5-year strategic plan. Really excited to take you through that here shortly. It's been a big work effort, and we're just excited to have that picture played out and allow us to get focused on our key priorities here in the years ahead. And then just this last few weeks has been a super exciting time within the realm of the Western energy imbalance market. I think, as you recall, back on April 21st, we were super pleased to announce that the WEIM had surpassed more than $2 billion in cumulative benefits since inception in 2014. It's just an incredible milestone and really a testament to the work of all of the different folks who are participants in that market. And then, of course, as you recall, back in early March, we were pleased to welcome Avista Utilities and Tacoma Power to the WEIM family. And then just last week on May 3rd, right around midnight, we were super pleased to see the cutover and the very, very successful integration of the Bonneville Power Administration and Tucson Electric into the WEIM. Of course, I have a little bit of a special interest in the BPA integration, having spent a good fraction of my professional career up there, and I just wanted to send a special acknowledgement to the colleagues up at BPA who made that happen. That was an absolutely enormous lift. The FCRPS brings just an incredible amount of clean energy and resource diversity and transmission capability to the market. The implementation lift and challenges were significant, and they just did an absolutely fabulous job. The cutover was truly seamless, and we really, really appreciate that. And then to Tucson, just fabulous to have another just wonderful partner in the Desert Southwest, really rounding out our connectivity and building on the footprint. And so we're now, with these 4 new participants, the WEIM now has 19 members, serving nearly 77% of the demand for electricity in the western U.S. And as we build out the connectivity, it does nothing but increase the physical and economic value of that market. And it's just a fabulous foundation on which to be building the extended day-ahead market. As I noticed, also the new records, there's been quite a bit of news out there in the world recently about some of the new renewable records that have been set on our system, and actually they sort of change every day. Just back on May 8th, the most recent number is that we had enough renewable energy generation on our system to represent 103.45% of load on the system. And so these are wonderful moments. They really do provide a glimpse into the future, and they provide a lot of very confidence building for our system operators that we can operate the grid at such high levels of renewable penetration. At the same time, they're relatively fleeting moments, and I think all of us that are working on the path towards a fully decarbonized grid recognize that there's still a lot of work to do, and a lot of additional resources to bring along, a lot of additional transmission capacity, a lot of storage and other resources that are going to contribute to that, but certainly a very positive step forward, and we're honored to be right there on the edge, really pushing the envelope in terms of renewable penetration, both in the country and in the world. So thanks to special nod to our system operators doing a fabulous job operating the system under those conditions. Finally, just a couple things you'll hear a little bit later here in the meeting today. Of course, we're bringing a sort of first package of interconnection queue reform enhancements. This is a really, really important issue for all of the folks who are looking to bring additional resources onto the system. I think we've, as we know, back in April 2021, we had a flood of applications that added more than 53 gigawatts of renewable generation, more than 100 gigawatts of storage to the queue. This is a significant amount of resource. Not only is it a tremendous resource challenge for our planning engineers, but also for the developers and the folks who want to bring resources online. It's obviously one of the key bottlenecks and one of the key sources of friction in the system that we need to continue making progress on. So I'm excited about the package that we're bringing to you today. I think we've made some real progress. We've had fabulous stakeholder input and lots of good ideas. At the same time, we have more work to do, and we will be coming back later this fall with another package of enhancements to move things forward. Last couple of things I want to mention is that we did put a final version of our 20-year transmission outlook on the street here in the last several days. Really appreciate, we got some really helpful, stakeholder feedback on that. I think generally a tremendous level of support across the state and across the West, really, for this kind of long-term look on transmission, the partnership with the state agencies and other stakeholders to really try to provide that long-term look and a sense of the underlying transmission architecture that the state's going to need to meet SB 100 goals, as well as opportunities to partner with folks outside of the state for interregional lines, I think was very valuable. As noted in the CEO report, we also did a little bit more of contextualization of the costs and the potential impacts of different approaches to cost allocation around the transmission lines, because I know that certainly affordability remains a high priority for the state and, of course, a high priority for the ISO as well. And finally, I'll just mention, we are in the final stages of finalizing a new policy for our employees around workplace flexibility. This has been the product of a long evolving conversation here over the last year as we've watched the changes in the labor market. We've watched our staff, work largely, with the exception of our system operators and a few other folks on our physical infrastructure side, working on a remote basis. We are effectively embracing a very flexible and individualized approach to work, where we will be offering our employees choices about how they would like to approach their work site, their work practices. We'll give folks a choice of a hybrid option, in which case they can come in for a day or two every week and structure their life around an office here. We're also offering choices around fully remote work. This is a big change for us, and all of us have had to do a lot of soul searching to figure out what's really best for our employees and what's best for the ISO. It's obviously something that we're going to have to watch carefully to make sure that we can maintain levels of productivity and continue to deliver on our mission. But I would say that so far, through over 2 years of the pandemic, our staff have really stepped up and I think have done a really remarkable job of continuing to deliver results for the ISO and the people we serve. So we are stepping into this brave new world. So there's a lot happening, obviously, between reliability and the market evolution and continued march of progress towards SB 100. We just appreciate the support and the hard work of everybody here at the ISO and all our partners across the West. Thanks for making these milestones a possibility. So I'll stop there, and if you have any questions, be happy to take them.
Any questions, Ellie? Okay.
No, I just have a comment. I just wanted to say, Elliot, that I think your report is really thorough, and most of this news is quite good, and particularly your handling of how we're going to be competitive with the ISO employees and the way you're personalizing plans for them, I think is a role model for others, because I think we are entering this whole new it's not even post-COVID world, continuing COVID world, and that you're doing the right thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I also want to pass on. Go ahead, Angelina.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate the fact and congratulate you and the operators on reaching the 100% renewable penetration on the grid. Certainly that is a huge milestone, and we should celebrate it. Yes, it may have been fleeting. We still need to get to every hour of every day, 24 hours, 365 days a year. But the marker has been set. We've got our work cut out for us, but the progress is clear and the path forward is clear too. So thank you, and thanks for all the hard work and leadership.
Thank you, Angelina. We've always appreciated your support on these issues. And yeah, it's an exciting moment and a reminder of lots more opportunity ahead. Thank you.
Yes.
And I also wanted to pass on my congratulations on getting the EDAM market design out. This is a really crucial step towards achieving our renewable goals, as well as lots and lots of economic benefits. It's really very exciting. So, okay, our next topic is a decision on the strategic plan, and it's Elliot again.
All right. Well, you get a little bit more of me, and I'm really, really excited about this. And before I, even go into it, I want to extend another round of thanks. If you think about everything that's been going on the last 18 months, think about all the reliability challenges in the market issues and just all the stakeholder engagement. We've had a core team inside the ISO working with a lot of folks around the West who've also been able to kind of stay focused and help us think about the longer term. And, I come from a sort of background where I'm just a big believer in the value of an organization having a strong and really clearly defined strategic plan. And the ISO has actually been operating from a strategic plan since 2015. And with all of the changes that have been sweeping the industry here in the last few years, just the passage of SB 100, the changes in the resource mix, the evolution of our resource adequacy paradigm, and of course, I think the wide-scale recognition of the importance of regional coordination and partnerships, we felt it was really time for a refresh. So I'm going to move us forward here and take you right through the new 2022 through 2026 strategic plan. So Christina, I think if I have control. So here we go. So this is the new document. This is our cover, really trying to capture the heart and soul of what we're all about. And of course, it points to the fact that, at the end of the day, about resources and about control system operations, and also our growing partnerships with our colleagues across the Western United States. And I want to start out, the document establishes, the kind of the core elements of who the ISO is, our core functions here within the state. It also talks about the additional functions that we've taken on in the last few years with the WEIM, and of course, back in 2019, having taken on the reliability coordinator function for a significant fraction of the Western United States. And as you'll see in my note at the beginning, kind of from the message from the President and CEO, I am just having grown up in the industry. I've always been a believer, and it's a little bit of a sloganeering, but you talk about the importance of strategy, but I think we all know that at the end of the day, culture eats strategy for lunch, right? If you don't have a strong culture in your organization, your chances of successfully delivering on your strategy are limited, right? And I feel very fortunate to have come into an organization at the ISO that is just such a service and service-oriented organization in such a productive and dynamic environment. But we also had a chance last year, after I joined the organization, to sort of take a fresh look at the ISO's values. And those that we ultimately identified, integrity, accountability, service, humility, and resilience, they really speak directly to who we want to be as an organization. As you can see here, you say, at heart, we're a public service entity committed to meeting our important responsibilities in accordance with the highest ethical standards, and we do so while engaging collaboratively with our diverse customers and stakeholders to take on the unprecedented challenges and opportunities facing our industry. And it's just been great to see the entire leadership team, staff from across the organization really embrace these values, and just remember how important it is how we show up as individuals, how we partner, how we collaborate, how we keep our head down and look for win-win solutions. That's really what we're all about, and we're excited to have this refreshed set of values. And of course, now with the plan, and I'll take you through the actions, it really this will become a document that's going to serve as the central organizing principle for the ISO and guide the priorities of our internal and external efforts over the coming years. And very consistent with our values, we've worked very closely, as you know, with our Board of Governors, the Western Energy Imbalance Market governing body, and we've done a lot of outreach with stakeholders from across California and the West to develop this document and to really help us prioritize the most important initiatives, make sure we're deploying our human and financial resources as efficiently as possible, and ensuring that we're meeting the most pressing needs of our customers and stakeholders in California and throughout the region. And as you'll see, as I move to the next page of the document, we've also tried to take a shot at re-articulating our vision, and sort of consistent, starting out, California is a place that likes to think big. We tend to believe in aiming high and also trying to accomplish those things that we know are really, really important and critical to our constituents. So our vision really is to operate the world's most reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally sustainable power system. And we're certainly hoping that our many partners, both in California and across the West, are going to help us achieve that. And so that really is the sort of the refreshed vision statement for the ISO. This section talks about some of the variables that are really shaping our industry. I'm not going to go into all of those today, but I think we all know just the level of resource transformation, the changing climate signal, and the very, very ambitious goals, both within California and in other states across the West, towards transformation of our system are very challenging, they're very ambitious, they're appropriate, and we need to work together to accomplish them. So what we've done is we've identified as our strategic plan 5 critical strategic and tactical objectives. These are the 5 areas that we think are the most important priorities for the ISO to move forward towards achieving that vision and really successfully negotiating this transition in the next 5 years. And I'm going to take you through each one of these, as you can see them here on this individual slide. But I'm going to start out by moving into the first one. And at the end of the day, our control center operators here in Folsom, who have also, of course, throughout the course of the entire pandemic, been on site running this grid every day. We start out at the heart and soul of our organization wanting to make sure that our control center tools and our technology are really up for the task, and that we are reliably and efficiently integrating new resources by proactively upgrading our operational capabilities. This is all about staying proactive, anticipating change, and thinking ahead so that when new resources like battery storage or distributed energy resources show up on the grid, we have already thought through many of the market design and technology challenges implicated by those new resources. And so our first goal is to really modernize the tools that support control center operations. We've been really building the relationships between our technology groups and our system operators to make sure that those tools are intuitive, they support good decision making and make the most of automation, and really that our control center is equipped with the most modern tools to address the type of resource transformation that's going on our grid. Of course, probably equally importantly, in some ways if not more so, is we need to make sure that our mission critical information technology platform is secure, scalable, and resistant, right? This gets right to the heart of cybersecurity during a time of significant transforming resource base. We also need to make sure that just our core IT platform has the capacity to adapt to our changing markets, is scalable as our footprint expands, and at the end of the day that we're bringing on the most cutting edge technologies around artificial intelligence and machine learning to make sure that we really are able to accommodate the trends towards a more complex and distributed systems. And we envision a future where we can leverage even greater amounts of information to support complex modeling, forecasting, and simulations that can help us to respond to uncertain events. And so that mission critical IT platform is something we really need to care for. And then of course, over time, we're starting to see now, especially with the additional growth of distributed energy resources, that we're seeing more of a trend in California towards the development of distribution system operators. I think we're still in the early stages of that, but it's really important that we work carefully to try to develop the communication protocols, the visibility tools, and the commercial interfaces between the wholesale transmission system and the distribution system to enable reliable operation of resources, as well as efficient access to the ISO's wholesale market for distributed resources that are interested in such participation. So this interface, both commercially and operationally, between the transmission system and the distribution system is something that we're going to continue to focus on and try to stay ahead of that curve. So obviously our first vertical, our first set of objectives, really focused on our core operational capabilities and staying ahead of the curve. We then move into our second strategic objective, and that is to strengthen resource adequacy and meet California's SB 100 goals through long-term transmission planning and effective coordination with state agencies. Probably one of our most foundational contributions to reliability in California is to ensure the development of long lead transmission plans that meet policy goals reliably and economically. We all know the challenges of building transmission and interconnection facilities. This requires a long-term look, careful planning, and very, very exquisite synchronization between these different processes. As I mentioned earlier today, we were really pleased to get on the street earlier this year our first 20-year transmission outlook. It's really focusing on stepping back and taking that longer-term view and partnering with the state agencies who have the long-term power planning and integrated resource planning responsibilities. So I think that's a big step forward. We're going to continue really building on that. And then, of course, we want to continue reimagining grid interconnection, prioritization, and coordination processes. You know, we have a lot of moving parts in California and other parts of the West that need to be synchronized. We're hoping that our long-term transmission planning process will be a good forcing function for better synchronization of long-term integrated resource planning, procurement, RA, and interconnection queuing. And we feel that transmission planning, effective transmission planning, you want it to be a leading indicator of queuing and these other processes rather than a lagging indicator. It's another key piece of proactivity that we're really going to be practicing here at the ISO. Also, under item C, we're going to be continuing to sharpen the ISO's resource adequacy strategy and clarify priorities for engagement in CPUC and California Energy Commission policy processes. You know, the RA responsibilities in California are distributed between the state agencies such as the CPUC and the CEC and other local regulatory authorities. And of course, we have some key core responsibilities around transmission planning and a number of other important tariff responsibilities regarding the evaluation of resource showings, establishing baselines for demand response resources, and helping set local and system resource adequacy requirements. And so we're really focusing on trying to make sure that we've clarified our analytical approach and regulatory strategy on each of these elements, aligning them as much as possible with state policies and engaging effectively in other state processes that impact overall reliability in California. And this is going to be a central focus of us as we continue to partner with other local regulatory authorities here in California and in other states as other resource adequacy programs develop in other areas where we have market footprint. And as you can see, some of our indicators of success for this very just greater clarity, less complexity, and better coordination and homogenization and harmonization between the ISO and state-level resource adequacy programs. This is going to be a really important thrust for us. We've hired a new director of resource adequacy who's really excited to get this strategy moving, and of course we're reporting back on this goal at the end of the year, something that we're putting a lot of focus on inside the state. Our third strategic focus area gets right to the heart of market expansion, and that is to build on the foundation of the Western energy imbalance market to further expand Western market opportunities. Of course, we touched on a lot of this with just the tremendous success of the Western energy imbalance market, and of course our efforts right now to build on that platform through the development of the extended day-ahead market. These are core strategies for us now. And of course, we know that folks are thinking about EIM to EDAM, even beyond in other forms of regional coordination and governance evolution. I know the board, you're very plugged into these conversations, and this is really something that has become a major topic and a really exciting opportunity across the West. And so for us, our first of our sub-goals here is to extend the ISO's day-ahead market to participants across the West and to pursue additional opportunities for regional coordination. Super excited to have the EDAM straw proposal on the street and really looking forward to continuing some real progress and some real results on that topic this year. At the same time, something that I've sort of been sensitized to is, the ISO, this is a very, very productive and busy organization. We ask a lot of our stakeholders as well. We produce a lot of different market design elements, and we want to make sure that we're really effectively prioritizing and sequencing our market design enhancements, right? We want to make sure that not only are we thinking about win-win solutions and thinking about issues in a multilateral perspective, but that we're committed to driving for simple, straightforward, and easily understood solutions that assure the equitable treatment of all market participants. And, the market design and the operation of the system operator is very complex. I know Mark Rothleader and I spent a lot of time talking about how do we sort of really cut to the heart and soul of the issues and try to develop the most straightforward approach we possibly can. We talk about Occam's razor, try to make things as simple as they can be and no simpler. And I'm just a big believer in trying to simplify where possible. And of course, at the same time, we have new technologies evolving. We want to enable new technologies through efficient market rules and interfaces. And so, we anticipate and welcome increasing diversity among market participants. We're going to continue to foster a power system that supports all who are capable of participating at the wholesale level. And to do this, we need concise market rules that carefully consider the most efficient way to integrate new resources into the power system while reducing complexity and allowing for scalability. We remain very supportive of enabling the next generation of distributed energy resources on the grid. Of course, I think we've got a fairly proactive and dynamic Order 2222 tariff, and we're going to continue looking for opportunities to really leverage demand response and distributed energy resources technology. So that whole gestalt of our market, extending our market across the West, working with our partners, building on the success of the WEIM, continuing to work with all of you on the necessary governance reforms, and really building out that West-wide footprint and bringing us all together through a collaborative and integrated market, a key element of the strategy here at the ISO. Our last couple of items, item 4 is to provide highly responsive and inclusive stakeholder engagement and customer service. I think from my perspective, this is something that I feel very fortunate that we're building on already a strong foundation. I think the ISO has for many years been a very welcoming environment for stakeholders across the spectrum, whether they're utilities or IPPs, environmental advocates, regulators, new technology providers. But we want to make sure that we continue to build on that and foster broad stakeholder trust through transparency, collaboration, and mutually beneficial solutions. So we want to continue to make sure that we're really welcoming a broad set of stakeholders, that we're running public processes that are truly inclusive, and that at the end of the day, folks feel like they're really being heard as we develop our different market design and governance proposals. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're providing highly accurate, easily accessible, and clear information to ensure customer preparedness and to deepen understanding about the reliability needs of the grid. Just in the last year, we've had a number of requests for greater data transparency, for greater ease of interfacing with our websites and our OASIS system, wanting to make sure that we can provide the best information about how the market is performing, how resources are performing, and that folks can really get a sense of being able to interface with our technology and our systems as efficiently as possible. So that's really what this initiative is about. And at the same time that we are doing that, we want to make sure that we're really ensuring rigorous information-driven decision-making across the ISO. We touch on so many different elements of the regional market, so many elements of infrastructure development, resource adequacy. We're really working on trying to improve our analytical capability, our data analysis capabilities, and to be able to deliver large amounts of information as efficiently and as effectively as we possibly can. I think that's going to build better trust. As you can see, some of the indicators of success here, accurately predicting the magnitude and direction of changes to supply, demand, and price volatility, transparent data in market design decisions, improved quality of forecasts associated with supply, demand, and price volatility, and enhanced ability to quantify uncertainty and manage risk. So a big push on analysis. And then finally, for this vertical, maintain customer confidence through continued disciplined cost management and strategic investments. As you know, as we talk to stakeholders across the state and the West, affordability, rate management, cost containment continues to be a very, very high priority for utilities and resource developers across the West. The ISO for many years has I think, done a remarkable job of maintaining a stable level of its grid management charge. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're making the necessary strategic investments in our systems, in our people, in our staffing. And we are, just this last year added over 25 new positions to the California ISO. We're going to continue to invest wisely, try to grow our revenue base, and maintain as much stability in our rates, but also be smart about new strategic investments. This is something we've heard clearly from our board, we've heard it from others, and we need to be wise about continuing to invest in the ISO while maintaining as much rate stability as possible. And our final vertical on this, this could probably easily come first because, as we know, we accomplish nothing without a fabulous workforce. But at the end of the day, what we want to try to do here is to create a flexible and adaptive work environment that retains and attracts a highly skilled and engaged workforce. And this has been a very dynamically evolving part of our strategic plan. It's the kind of thing we almost have to update it every week because of the changes in the labor market. And as I mentioned earlier in my CEO report, we have now adopted a much more flexible and individualized approach to workplace, to where folks will work and accomplish their mission for the ISO. And at the same time, we need to stay true to really, I think, core cultural and workplace environment elements. And so we need to make sure that we're fostering an equitable and inclusive workplace that really models excellence and the ISO's cultural values. This is going to be something I think it's going to become increasingly challenging in a world where many of us are working on Zoom calls across the course of the day. On the other hand, you've got to maintain that and find ways to continue to transmit culture and to make sure that those values of integrity and accountability, service, humility, and resilience really come through. And this is going to be a challenge, but something that we're redoubling our absolute commitment to. And then, of course, cultivating strong leadership and technical competencies. This year, working with our leadership team, we rolled out a new set of leadership behaviors for the ISO, a set of core competencies that I'm going to be expecting will be modeled by every member of the leadership team at the ISO, and quite frankly, staff can model them as well. And then at the same time, investing in the technical competencies of our staff. We ask a lot of our staff, very highly complex and sophisticated issues that they address, and we need to continue investing in their intellectual capital and growing them. And finally, of course, making sure that we've got strong succession plans, high engagement levels, and ultimately that our employees feel like the ISO is a place where they can continue to really grow and learn. So those are the 5 critical strategic objectives for the ISO's new 2022 through 2026 strategic plan. This really, as I said, becomes the sort of strategic blueprint that we'll be using here in the years ahead, and we are feel very aligned around these objectives, of course, for the board, and we've appreciated your feedback along the way. Your thoughts and your input have made this document stronger, I think more nuanced, so I certainly hope that you feel that your input has been reflected. Of course, the governing body and the state regulatory agency, the governor's office, had plenty of opportunity to input on this, and I think stakeholders from across the West. So this is what we've settled on. We're excited to roll up our sleeves and deliver on these objectives, and I think that if we are able to successfully execute on these goals, we are going to be able to take one big step closer to achieving that vision of operating the world's most reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally sustainable power system. So I will take a breath, appreciate the time to lay that out, and see if we have any questions from any of the Board of Governor members, and we also, I think, we'll have some space for some public comment if necessary. So thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Elliot. Any questions from the board?
Yes, it's not really a question. Elliot, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity that you gave us as the board to participate and offer comments. I know this has been a long process to get to this point. It's an excellent document, and that was an excellent overview. I personally just wanted to emphasize one point that you mentioned as a critical element, and that is this need to coordinate. California, to me, is a little unusual in that we have the load forecasting being done at the Energy Commission, the resource adequacy, decision-making, long-term planning, as well as annual planning being done at the Public Utilities Commission, and then the ISO with the responsibility for the day-ahead markets and the real-time management of electricity and ensuring that the lights stay on and that consumers are served. So I just wanted to emphasize that because I think we have kind of a unique role and responsibility, that coordination out of everything you have in here, as important as everything is absolutely critical for us to be successful. And I think you are continuing to pilot and expand upon new and different ways of ensuring that we are in good communication with all of the state policymakers. So I wanted to thank you for that, but encourage you to continue to look for new ways to make sure that that we're all working in lockstep to make sure that we get a good outcome. Thanks.
Thanks.
Really appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Okay, then let's go to public comment. Any comment?
As a reminder, if you would like to make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon.
Yes.
And Anita, you can go ahead.
Well, thank you. Chair Bagua, Vice Chair Leslie, and the governors. The Western Energy Imbalance Market governing body would like to take a moment and acknowledge our appreciation of the Board of Governors and the CalISO staff for the opportunities we had to provide input into this strategic plan. We were briefed along the way, and we can see where our thoughts and comments are incorporated into the plan that you have before you for adoption. This is really a great piece of work. We were really pleased to see the Western Energy Imbalance Market, the third goal, with a lot of robustness around it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Anita.
And yes, I want to double emphasize what Chair Decker just mentioned, which is both boards had extensive input opportunities into the plan. Any further public comment?
At this time, there are no more public comments.
Okay, then I think, Roger, we're ready for a motion.
Excellent. Thank you, governors. Thank you, Elliot. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO's 2022-2020 to 2026 strategic plan as attached to the memorandum dated May 9, 2022. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Governor Borenstein. Second?
Second, Jan.
Thank you, Governor Shorey. Your vote,
Roger.
Governor Bagua.
Go ahead, please go.
Your vote, Governor Bagua.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Governor Golitova. Angelina, you may be on mute.
Oh, I said aye. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Governor Leslie.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion is approved. Elliot, you had a comment?
I just wanted to, just one last, with the formal approval of the document, I wanted to, don't typically do this as much, but I wanted to just single out three people at the ISO, Sarah Garcia, Gary Delson, Stacy Gibbs, and I also wanted to recognize John Andrews. We had a core team here who carried a lot of water and just did a tremendous coordinating action. Wanted to really thank the staff for their persistence and a really nice job. So thank you for your support. Great to have this, and we're roll up our sleeves and go deliver on it. So thanks again.
Thank you. Absolutely. Congratulations to the staff from the board. Our next item is the WEIM Governing Body Chair Report. Chair Decker.
Thank you, and hello again. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Western Energy Imbalance Governing Body, and we met on May 10th. And in our general session, Utah Commissioner Chair and Chair of the Body of State Regulators, Thad LeVar, provided an update on the BOSSER activities, of note being the topics that were covered during the BOSSER and CREPC meeting last week in San Diego. The BOSSER does expect to provide comments on the EDAM, and their next meeting is June 10th. Vijay Satal of Western Resource Advocates is the chair of the Regional Issues Forum, and they had their first in-person meeting also in conjunction with the BOSSER CREPC meeting in San Diego. The RIF sectors are working together on their priorities that they expect to bring to the Western Energy Imbalance Market and governing body, and they are looking at how they're expanding that RIF role based on the governance changes that were approved last August. The governing body heard from the CalISO staff on the smooth implementation into the Western Energy Imbalance Market of Bonneville and Tucson Electric. And we also heard from representatives of both companies who also supported that they did have a very smooth implementation, which is always good to hear. And Khaled also did a great job talking about the work that was done in collaboration of the two companies and some of the new things that were done with the Bonneville administration, and then also the first in the nation, I understand, joint owned unit protocols that were developed by the CalISO in their implementation with Tucson. So as Elliot mentioned, this represents 77% of the load in the Western Interconnect. And in 2023, we will see that increase to 79% of the load in the Western Interconnect with WAPA Desert Southwest, Avangrid, and El Paso Electric coming on. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Doesn't sound like it. Thank you very much, Nita. Okay, let's move on to our next item, which is the decision on interconnection process enhancements, phase 1. Mr. Miller.
I'm sorry. We really need to put this on the list, right? Let me interject that we do have received, for the record, that we have received 4 public comment letters on this matter that have been provided to the board. And those are from Large Scale Solar Association, from California Wind Energy Association, EDF Renewables North America, and one late this morning, early this afternoon from Amazon Energy LLC. And all those letters have been provided to the board. Thank you, Chair Bhagwat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bhagwat and Board of Governors. It's Neil Miller here. Before I turn this over to Bob Emmert to walk through the proposal itself, I did want to step in and provide a bit of context. And first, I want to thank Bob and the ISO team, as well as the stakeholders who participated in some of the most challenging issues I believe we can face. The interconnection process issues we're talking about not only affect potential future proposals, but also affect projects that are already in progress, working their way through the application process. So these, like I said, are perhaps as challenging and sensitive an issue as we could expect to deal with. We really appreciate the support from industry, though, in recognizing the need for changes and participating very actively in those discussions. And you've already heard some very positive comments about the process from EDF Renewables. And like I said, we appreciate those comments as well as the rest of the industry support we received. I do want to also just set some context that the generation interconnection process is one of a number of infrastructure-related issues that we deal with at the ISO that our processes are often held up in industry as among best in class. But nonetheless, we did recognize that given the unprecedented challenges we're facing with the pace of development that we're looking at over the next 5 to 10 years, these processes have to be as good as they could possibly be. And we will also be looking at and are making other changes on processes including our transmission planning process, information transparency around transmission project status and system capabilities, as well as coordinating with the state agencies on their efforts to ensure that projects are able to move forward as quickly and effectively as possible. Now, when we focus on the generation interconnection or resource interconnection processes, those were already a concern, an area where we saw that we needed to focus on improvements for the efficacy of the overall process. But that was certainly emphasized by the Cluster 14 request window application window that arrived in April of 2021, with 363 projects generating over 150,000 megawatts of hard assets located behind 110,000 megawatts of point of interconnection. So just a tremendous amount of volume. And to put that in context, last year the CPUC authorized its single largest ever procurement authorization, which was 11,500 megawatts. So considerable difference there between the amount of projects seeking to connect, vastly overwhelming the amount of actual procurement activity. So that put a sharper focus on the need to address this generation interconnection process as quickly as possible. Now, in doing this work, there's a balance of developing the ease of application for projects stepping forward and moving through the process that also has to be balanced with providing meaningful and timely results to generators or other resources that are well positioned to actually move forward. And given what we saw last April, clearly that balance needed to be revisited. There was broad support for the need to make changes, but the devil is definitely in the detail on what changes would be made. We also had, in the course of this work, have to take into account that we are dealing with allocating transmission capacity that is ultimately paid for by ratepayers. So our allocation processes have to take that into account and always focus that we are looking to address our ratepayers' best interests in those allocation decisions, given where the transmission system costs ultimately fall. As I mentioned, there was broad support for the need for changes, and we have been pleased with the level of consensus we were able to achieve. We do recognize that getting 100% agreement on all issues was extremely unlikely, but given the sensitivity of the issues we're dealing with, we were very pleased with the level of consensus the team was able to achieve. And I want to thank Bob, the team, and our stakeholders for the hard work they put into achieving that. So with that, by way of background, I'd like to turn it over to Bob Emmert, our Manager of Interconnection Resources, to walk you through the Phase 1 proposals.
All right. Well, thank you, Neil, and good afternoon, governors and all who are attending. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is what we call the Ike Initiative, Ike 2021. We started this initiative back in late September of last year. And the primary goals of going into this initiative were around to help projects more effectively and efficiently move through the queue, and also to help manage the queue that Neil discussed, and also to better align the interconnection process with resource procurement activities, as well as to address other residual and improvement needs that became apparent since the last Ike Initiative back in 2018. So next slide, thank you. So at the onset, we developed two phases for this. The initial phase 1, which we were discussing today, are for the items that really needed to get to the board and get FERC approval for tariff changes so that they would be in place for Cluster 14 as the projects receive their phase 1 study reports in September and will be making decisions how they're going to proceed moving forward if they want to go into phase 2 study processes. And some of the proposals that are bringing to you today relate to the what they have to do to actually move into the phase 2 process. So that's the phase 1 study items. Phase 2 items focus on resolving more long-term modifications and broader reforms to align the interconnection process with procurement activities. And we'll be bringing those topics to you around this October board meeting. Altogether, in phase 1, there were 13 topics that we're bringing to you today, but I do want to get into more detail on 3 of those topics. These 3 topics required more stakeholder engagement to work through the issues related to these topics, and we made adjustments all the way through the process, even all the way to the final proposal for these topics. So I wanted to go into these topics in a bit more detail. The first one is enhancing the allocation transmission plan deliverability process to projects. And to give a bit of background of what transmission plan deliverability is all about, projects that want to participate in the resource adequacy program must have transmission plan deliverability to make their projects full capacity delivery status, which allows them then to be able to sell that capacity to entities that have an RA obligation. And so most procurement entities want the projects that they procure on a long-term basis to have full capacity delivery status. So the customers are seeking that for the most part. And through the enhancements that we did, we wanted to be able to simplify and streamline the process and to seek to better align the process with procurement activities and to be able to move resources more effectively through the queue. So the proposal revises the prioritization and qualifications of the deliverability allocation process. And it creates new eligibility criteria which allow projects to qualify for an allocation earlier in the process, which will simplify the procurement process for procurement entities. And what that means is if they get an allocation at the very beginning, right after their phase 2 study process, they can go into the request for offers that procurement entities put out, knowing they already have an allocation, so that those that are procuring those projects can choose from projects that already have an allocation. And the proposal also increases the ability for viable projects to obtain deliverability and requires projects not obtaining a power purchase agreement to relinquish that deliverability more quickly, making it available for other projects. And also, we revised the requirements for power purchase agreements in the allocation process, where we established a minimum 3-year contract term requirement for PPAs contracting for the RA capacity. However, we won't be implementing that until 2023, because it's our understanding that some entities are in negotiations now for a term less than 3 years, and we didn't want to derail those particular negotiations. And then we also are allowing PPAs with large customers to be eligible for an allocation. This slide shows the proposed allocation groups, where we have 4 groups, groups A, B, C, and D, where groups A, B, and C are pretty much consistent with what we did last year. We just collapsed some of the groups together, where used to be where if you were in group A, they had different criteria for those who were energy only versus those who were full capacity delivery status. So we combined those into just one group A. Same thing for group B. Group A is for projects that have an executed PPA, and the allocation actually occurs in this order, starting with A and ending in group D. Group B is for projects that have a short list or are actively negotiating a PPA. Group C is for projects that have reached commercial operation, regardless of whether they have a PPA or not. And then Group D is a new allocation group that doesn't have any requirements for a PPA or short list or being in operation. And it's that group that I talked about, where we are now allocating to projects ahead of the time, to where they can get ahead of the game in their procurement activities, but also if they aren't able to procure either a short list or execute a PPA, they are required to relinquish their allocation sooner than in past processes. This slide is on the topic of site exclusivity, where we're changing the requirements for site exclusivity for projects that are moving through the queue. Site exclusivity is a process where a project needs to demonstrate that they have control of the site that they actually want to construct on. And if they aren't able to demonstrate some level of site exclusivity or control, they do have an option to provide a deposit in lieu of site exclusivity. And the changes that we're proposing will incentivize interconnection customers to withdraw less viable projects prior to entering the phase 2 study process, and to align again prior to the phase 2 study process. It'll improve the accuracy of the study results by studying only the more viable projects that move forward, and it'll improve overall efficiency by reducing the study time spent on less viable projects. So just to, at a very high level, talk about the proposal, for cluster 14, the site exclusivity deposit will be 100% non-refundable after the project enters their phase 2 studies. So that's an incentive for less viable projects to really take a harder look at, do they really want to move forward into phase 2? Because if they do move forward into phase 2 and they later withdraw, their site exclusivity deposit will not be refundable. And then starting with cluster 15 and later, we will be increasing the deposit for the site exclusivity. There will be 50% of the deposit will not be refundable 30 days after the scoping meeting. Scoping meeting is a place where customers really for the first time meet with the engineers, with the ISO, with the participating transmission owners, and really learn more information about the point of interconnection that they have selected and what type of upgrades they may be encountering through the study process. And once they get that information, it really helps them to understand, do they really have a viable project at the location they've chosen? And so we give them 30 days to make a decision, and they will be able to withdraw and get 100% of their deposit back. But after that point in time, 50% will be non-refundable. And after that, we will be requiring documentation of site exclusivity to enter into the Phase 2 studies. The last of these three items, and I'm going in more detail, is a process for interconnecting new generation under an emergency state mandate. This process facilitates emergency generation that may be needed in the future, making it possible to interconnect generation without having to rely on requests to FERC to waive existing interconnection process tariff provisions. This is something we had to do based on some emergency generation that we interconnected prior to the summer of 2021, and we wanted to get this into our tariff so we didn't have to actually file waivers for getting those projects online. The process is predicated on a specific emergency state mandate from the governor, and only for interconnections and additions specifically designated by a state agency, which will not include counties, municipalities, or CCAs. And additional requirements that prohibit impacts to the cost or timing of current queued projects are key to this proposal as well. So this slide shows the remaining 10 topics that we are seeking your approval for today. These topics were much more straightforward and easy to gain consensus on, and much less difficult, or just the details were just much more simple items to work through, to where we got stakeholder consensus on these items very quickly, and the proposals for these items didn't even change at all for the last two papers. They were pretty much held as is. So with that, management recommends the board approve the proposed generator interconnection enhancements, which improve the effectiveness of allocating deliverability to projects and expands customer options, help to move resources through the queue and manage the overheated queue, improves the generator interconnection and deliverability allocation procedures, ability to interconnect significant amounts of new generation expeditiously to meet near-term significant generation expansion requirements and policy goals. So that ends my remarks on this. Do we have any questions? Or Neil, do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, thanks, Bob. I think that we'd now be looking to see if there are any questions we could help with.
I'm going to start with a question myself. I was hoping for a response to the concern raised in the LSA letter regarding the minimum 3-year term for PPAs and why we have that.
Yes, it's Neil here. I can take a first shot, and then I'll ask Bob to fill in any additional detail. So at a high level, this concern around the term for the resource adequacy capacity contract did emerge more recently when we became aware that, to be blunt, that there were contracts being put forward as supporting an allocation of deliverability that were for very short terms. And in fact, stakeholders were asking what the absolute minimum term was that could apply in order to get deliverability. And that actually started to raise a very real concern for us that a really short-term resource adequacy capacity contract it raises the question of how valid is that arrangement, and is it in the best interest of our ratepayers to allocate capacity at the highest priority level through a power purchase agreement resource adequacy contract that is of such short term. And we did see, I think we started originally proposing a 5-year term as being relevant, but backed it off to 3 years based on stakeholder feedback, but also recognizing the procurement showing expectation for local capacity resources is 3 years out. So to us, that seemed to be the absolute minimum we could consider. But the key issue here is contracts that are not recognized are not ineligible for deliverability. We're talking about which priority group they fall into in getting access to the deliverability that does exist. So if there is deliverability capacity available for everyone that's applied in that process, it's not an issue. But if you do have to ration, who should get first access to that capacity? And that's where we felt that some minimum term, if people are no longer entering into these contracts for the reasonable financing life of the project, that some reasonable minimum term needed to be established. And so that's where we started on, that's where we're at on this issue. And it's really about protecting that, are we doing the right thing given the highest priority of access to deliverability to a contract that's really questionable about how effective it is at bringing RA capacity to the table for the benefit of our ratepayers. Bob, would there be more detail you'd add to that?
I think you captured it well. The only thing I would add is when we put in these allocation procedures in place back in 2013, it was under the assumption, which I think was a good assumption at the time, that when load-serving entities were doing long-term contracts to procure these projects, that they were procuring the RA components, the RA capacity for those contracts on a long-term basis as well. So we didn't really think there was a need for a minimum term. But as it became more and more apparent that people were considering shorter terms, we felt it was appropriate to come up with something as a minimum term for those type of requirements.
And I should mention that we do not want to actually be diving more and more into the details of the power purchase agreements. Some of the questions we were fielding definitely raised the concerns that the resource adequacy capacity was actually being carved out separately or being decoupled from the rest of the contract that actually provided the financing for the project, and raised the question of, putting it bluntly, how real is the RA capacity obligation that's being developed? And as I said before, is that in the best interest of the rate-paying customers who are funding this transmission system provided deliverability?
Neil, quick question. Can you please expand a little bit more on the decoupling of the RA from the rest of the contract? If you were to decouple the RA, I mean, apparently that's a big and a very meaningful item for getting the financing of the project. So if you were to take the RA component away, what would an entity do with it ostensibly? Sell it to a third party for something else?
I think that, so part of it is based on what we understand, but like I said, we do not have access to all of the commercial details of the power purchase agreements. But I do think it depends on the type of resource we're talking about. That for a pure standalone solar project, the qualifying capacity value of that product has been declining over the last number of years, and we expect it to continue to decline. So for something like a standalone solar project, we're seeing that the bulk of the value that it's providing is actually more, and especially into the future, more driven by the renewable energy it provides, not by its resource adequacy capacity. Now, other types of resources that are there to provide RA capacity as their primary product would have a completely different value proposition. So I think there isn't a single answer that applies for all resource types, where the resource adequacy capacity value they bring to the table definitely varies and will continue. The difference in how much they provide will continue to grow as we move forward.
I know, but my question is, if you are carving out, as you mentioned in your statement, the RA product, what would you do with that product if it's not part of the PPA or part of the contract going to the LSC? Where is it going? Or going to the customer? Just curious. I mean, I understand green tags. You trade green tags. What do you do with an RA product that's decoupled from the contract?
Presumably you would try to sell it to someone else if the project's been developed.
Who? Who would buy an RA product separately, like a green tag?
Well, anyone else who's short on resource adequacy capacity but might already have their energy obligations being met.
So you're worried that it would be someone in a totally different geographic area, rendering the RA meaningless because it wouldn't apply to that area? Or I'm trying to understand what the issue is.
It could be sold outside of the area. or not even offered at all, depending on what the market's looking like.
Is there a market for banking them, just like green tags, and then you can sell them later? But I don't understand how that would work for RA.
Oh, resource adequacy capacity is only a value in the year that it's obliged to be shown.
Right.
So
So
do you have
can't
it under
bank
contract now?
So what would you do?
Sorry, I better circle back on when you say what would I do. What would I do with
the carve out of the RA, separate from the contract? As you said, someone might just not do anything with it, but carve it out. I'm just trying to figure out what that would achieve.
Well, I think what it's achieving is minimizing their upfront commitment in their contracting. Because I think the other question is, and this one we do not have a good answer for, is why are RA contracts being struck with such a short term that they're clearly not financing the project? If someone's coming to us with an RA contract of 1 year and saying that that's the basis for financing their project, we do struggle with someone financing a long-term project based on a 1-year contract. So we believe that they're decoupling the resource adequacy, but that there is a longer-term arrangement in place for the energy.
Yeah, let me get a clarification on that. We're concerned that these short RA projects are less viable than the longer RA projects? Not longer PPA, sorry. Longer PPA projects?
We're concerned that they shouldn't be getting the same priority as someone that has entered into a long-term RA contract with a load-serving entity. Okay. How it plays out in terms of who's viable or not is a tough call for us to make. But by the very token of us being asked about what the minimum would qualify that would still allow a project to get and hold on to deliverability for some number of years before they have to step aside and relinquish it is a concern. So part of it is managing the efficiency of the projects that are ready to move forward, getting to move forward, the projects that aren't, not lingering and holding on to capacity that they're not really able to move forward with immediately, and holding up other projects that are waiting behind them.
That I completely understand. I mean, and they should never be holding up other projects, and the projects that have more viability should move under the appropriate circumstances ahead of projects that don't have as much viability. And we're achieving that with asking them to post larger amounts in securities and putting capital at risk. I'm still confused about the RA component and how that RA component makes them less viable.
That's the issue of someone using a really short-term PPA contract to say that that's a viable long-term arrangement they have in place and that they actually will be moving forward. Raises concern.
Okay. Quick question, Neil. If we're looking at any standalone project, wind or solar, being built out, why would they only have a very short PPA contract of 1 year and build out the whole project? That makes no sense.
Yeah. That's our concern, actually.
But do we see that happening? I'm just wondering, you have someone building a solar project and saying, I only have a 1-year PPA. I want deliverability for 20?
We have people coming in now wanting shorter than 3-year terms and using that as the basis to get deliverability. Whether they are not they actually move through to construction is a different question. And we just don't have enough history there to be confident that to say one way or the other. But it certainly raises concerns for the very reason you're bringing up, Governor Glutova, that someone coming in with a very short-term RA obligation raises obvious questions about, is that really the basis for financing the project and allowing it to move forward? And when we talk about viability, I want to be clear, we're not trying to ever make a decision about how viable that project is that it could ever be developed. We're trying to allocate deliverability to the projects that are ready, that are most ready. First in line are the projects that are most ready to move forward now, so that the projects that are most able to move forward now move forward and are not held up by projects that might not be ready to move forward today, even if they're ultimately successful.
So are we worried? Again, I'm just trying to clarify it, and forgive me for going into this again. So are we trying to avoid the situation of someone coming in with a not very serious contract with an entity for only 1 year and saying, I want deliverability so I can finance my project, but wink, wink, nod, nod, I'm not expecting this to be a real contract? Is that the situation we're addressing? And then if so, why are we carving out RA? That's the whole PPA contract, not just RA.
Well, because we were selling deliverability or providing deliverability to qualify for resource adequacy, we have always focused just on that. Going beyond the provisions of the resource adequacy capacity into the rest of the terms of the contract, I think would even raise more concerns from the resource community that that's outside of our wheelhouse, that the rest of their terms are none of our business. But at least tying the resource adequacy component to the allocation of deliverability when it's a necessary condition to sell resource adequacy capacity, we felt we had a strong tie for why that is our business.
So we're extrapolating based on the RA what the rest of the PPA is, since we don't have visibility into that contract. Is that what's going on?
And yes, and up until recently, that seemed to be a valid assumption. This has been a more recent occurrence of people bringing in contracts with much shorter terms.
So you're trying to weed out those contracts because they may not be serious contracts and put them to the side and give preferential move ahead to projects that actually have better terms.
So Governor Gilliffe, if I could, can I chime in? This is Mark Rothschild, right? I think the answer is we want to make sure that the resources that are moving forward and actually going in through and getting into production are the ones that have RA, and that the RA is getting in the hands of who needs it, the load serving entities. And rather than having projects that move forward or take up space that really are not going to move forward or don't have the intention to actually get RA to a load serving entity. So I think we're just trying to help that along and make that differentiation.
And thanks, Mark. And the only other thing I would add is that I do need to come back to the point that projects that if we say, well, this is too short a term, we don't believe it qualifies, that means that it doesn't qualify for that first premium Group A first in line. It does not mean that they can't qualify for deliverability, but if there's a shortage in that area, who should be getting first access through Group A versus falling into one of the lower priority groups that Bob walked through? So
you're trying to streamline the process. Okay.
Yeah. So
okay, thank you.
So that's an important. I have to say though, that's a really important distinction for us. That we're not saying these projects cannot get allocated deliverability. It's a case of where in the priority list do they get allocated if we can't accommodate everyone.
And you don't want the non-viable projects holding up the process.
We want the most viable at the front of the line.
Okay.
Severin?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I understood most of this, and now I'm a little less sure I do. Can I ask, since I'm an economist, there seem to be two scarce resources here. One is deliverability, which could potentially, we just don't have capacity to deliver everything. And the other is time for consideration within the queue. That is, the scarce resources, CAISO or other review process. And it seems, I thought this was about allocating the latter, the sort of queue location, but it's also about allocating in cases where there just isn't going to be enough deliverability overall on a given path. Is that correct?
I think so. Yes.
So I understand as an economist how we usually allocate scarce resources with price, and we sell them off. And in some sense, we don't want to do that here. We want to do it through some evaluation of the social value of the user is likely to put the resource to. And so we're trying to figure that social value. And one of the ways we seem to be doing it is through some recognition that the private value to the user is related to that, saying, show us some money. And the other way is to try to actually do an evaluation of the social value, which is tough because there are a lot of characteristics of these projects. And we're not going to say, do a full value analysis, show us every detail, and they would say it's not your business. So what we're doing is we're saying, here are a couple indicators. And one of them is if you have a very short contract, you're less likely to be providing high social value with this, or you're less reliably going to provide high social value with this usage. And so we're going to give you lower priority because you're more likely to drop out. We could do more of this with money. And since there are objections that we have received to the PPA and contract length and so forth, did that come up in the discussion of this trade-off between showing financial or making financial commitments non-refundable versus these sort of characteristic methods for allocating?
I don't think an auction or...
No, and I'm not suggesting an auction, just be clear. I know we're not, but we are saying we're going to make some deposits non-refundable, which means we're going to require you to put up your money as a sign that you're going to come through, as opposed to we're going to evaluate characteristics of your project, like your PPA length, as a sign that you're going to come through. And we're doing both of those. It seems that in some sense they're substitutes for one another. If we required somebody to put up an infinite amount of money, we could be pretty sure they're going to follow through. Or if we did a full analysis, we might not require so much money, but that would be extremely expensive. And so we're sort of striking a balance here, it seems, doing some characteristic evaluation in a pretty simple way, because we don't want to spend huge personnel resources, but also having some non-refundability for financial purposes. Is that a fair way to think about this? And did people talk about this trade-off?
I think it is. And the other thing we have to take into consideration is that the load-serving entities themselves are running fairly comprehensive processes to decide which contracts to award in the first place. So we're not trying to undermine the financial and the commercial sensitivities of the issues that the off-takers themselves are going through in their process. We are, though, trying to allocate out the transmission capacity that's been provided proactively through the transmission planning process in a way that maximizes the potential of it being used effectively in the contracting process. But many of the commercial issues you were raising, price definitely matters, but that's an issue that is more being addressed in the competition and in the awarding of power purchase agreements in the first place. So we're trying to dovetail into that without interfering with the contracting process, which is also why the rules need to be simple and as clear and simple as we can make them, given the multiple procurement processes these resources are playing in.
Great, thank you.
So, Neil, thank you for addressing all these issues. And I just want to clarify a couple things. One is we're getting a lot of these letters late. We had a lengthy discussion earlier today about how in the future it'd be great when people are weighing in on key issues if they could do that effectively, give us a week to take a look at them, because our process is that we're briefed by staff on issues coming in front of the board. And if stakeholders want to support it or have issues with it, it would be good if they could address that at least a week ahead of time. Because what's happening is we're getting these letters last minute, which is putting us in an awkward position of not really getting the benefit of your thinking vis-a-vis their concerns. So in the spirit of that, several of my colleagues have raised several of the issues. The issues that Amazon is raising this morning, which I think you did address in our briefing actually. Can you just clarify that in terms of competitiveness and not disadvantaging them?
Well, thank you. Actually, there is a lot of commonality in the fundamental issue here of the Amazon are raising a concern that as a commercial entity, they've been entering into power purchase agreements with resources that then when they take service from a load serving entity, they're bringing that contract in with them. But it's not clear to us how their power purchase agreement and the resource adequacy component that they're building into their agreements as a commercial entity actually finds its way through, barring actually someone showing us, how that finds its way through to a load serving entity's resource adequacy showings obligations. How does that resource actually end up on someone's supply plan for meeting their RA obligations? And we've indicated that if one of these commercial contracts also is accompanied by that link to a load serving entity, then we would give them that same first level priority access to deliverability. But if they do not have that, they would fall into one of the lower buckets of priority. There's still the opportunity for deliverability, but they're at the lower priority in the deliverability process. So that's where we have to ask, is a contract with a load serving entity who has a resource adequacy obligation, should that get a higher, equal, or lower priority than a contract with a commercial party? But if the commercial party does have an agreement in turn with a load serving entity so that that resource finds its way through, we do recognize that as that top priority bucket.
Got it. And this issue of if you're then deemed energy only, right, that this would disincentivize that interest from doing storage, how would you respond to that?
You mean as if they were already moving forward with one project and then wanting to add storage?
Well, they're saying based in their letter that they would be disinclined with an energy only designation to pursue teaming their project with storage, which...
Well, that is the judgment call about, again, they have access to deliverability just at a lower priority. So if they don't have that arrangement in place eventually with a load serving entity, they would be at a lower priority and presumably they would be less likely to move forward.
Okay, that's a fair comment.
Yeah. The other option in Group 3 includes projects that have actually come online and then requested deliverability, Group C. Group D, as Bob indicated, includes parties with no PPAs whatsoever.
Thank you.
Following up on that, do we have a sense of how often these third-party contracts end up selling RA to an LSC?
Yeah.
I don't think these contracts have been getting developed for enough years for us to develop any track record on that, actually. This is something relatively new showing up.
Okay, that makes sense. Jen?
Yeah, until this last allocation cycle, projects that were getting an allocation were projects that had a contract with a load-serving entity. This first allocation cycle is the first time that we've seen this come to us for an allocation.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Is it okay if I go ahead? Okay, thanks. Listening to this discussion, this has been very helpful, although I may now be more thoroughly confused. I started out looking at this issue as something that I saw as just basically allocating scarcity the way Severin described it, and the scarcity here is staff resources, and to be frank, any of the transmission owners' resources when it comes to doing studies that require a lot of technical expertise. So there's only a few people, generally speaking, who know how to do them. You got to figure out how do you get the most likely and best projects to those folks, and particularly look at how we prioritize them in terms of availability and need. So when I looked at the proposal that's coming in from management, it seemed to me that it was reasonable to have these 4 categories to figure out which one you should try and go after first, because we really did. I mean, the whole reason we even are having this discussion is we just got flooded with this last cluster that came in, and we recognized we can't continue to do business the way we have been. So I actually thought that was a good strategy. What's complicated it for me now is this discussion of resource adequacy, because I realize maybe I'm not thoroughly familiar with how visible it is to the ISO, to our organization, where the resource adequacy needs are, where they're coming in. And I guess I've thought that is through looking at what's going on with the load-serving entities and the commitments that are being made at the PUC and by others, and then by the load-serving entities on how they're going to meet that, recognizing that all then builds into our day ahead and ultimately real-time schedules. So this is a new complication or a wrinkle to me, that underneath this load-serving entity level now, we're going to get into what I still think of, which is probably wrong, as retail or perhaps just very large customers who now want to supply their own resource adequacy, but they're going to be supplying it to the load-serving entity, which I'm assuming is the visibility level for us. From just sort of a practical perspective, the idea that you could go get financing for virtually any kind of project on a 1-year power purchase deal, I've never seen anything like that. Now, maybe it's out there these days, but it seems to me that normally you do have to have a somewhat longer commitment. So I'm struggling with trying to figure out how real this issue is. And I'm interested that we are getting feedback that, at least for some entities and significant ones, it is a real issue. So I will just tell you that's why I'm confused on what to do about this resource adequacy visibility, because I personally was in the 5-year camp. So I thought 3 was being quite reasonable.
Now, I can appreciate your concern, because it was the same for us when this issue of shorter RA contracts were emerging. That raised the same obvious concern that clearly that's not the basis. And when we have people talking about a year or less, clearly that's not the basis for a 20-year financing on a project for potentially an RA contract that's less than a year. So something else is obviously part of the value proposition there. We've been trying to focus on the resource adequacy component, because that is the part we have visibility to for what load-serving entities show on their resource adequacy plans, that we can track about what's coming in year by year when people are demonstrating how they're complying with their resource adequacy obligations. And it's also tied to the transmission system capability that we're allocating. And for us, it still came back at the end of the day to, we believe we should be allocating, when capacity is scarce in certain areas, we should be allocating that deliverability capacity to the highest ranking resources first, which to us were the ones that had the most material commitment and a reasonable term attached to it. And the others can still get in line, but they're just at a lower place in the line.
All right. Perhaps we should move on to public comment, because I know there is some.
And if there's public comment in the public comment, and if we don't get it in the public comment, Neil, can you or one of the commenters walk us through, I think it would be helpful for the board, a project where what would that project be, and if they're decoupling RA from the power purchase contract, what are they doing with that RA, and is the 1 year that they want to shop it around to different LSEs on a year-by-year basis, or what is the rationale for doing that? I'd like to hear from the developer side as to why this is of interest and value to them and how this process is helping or not. Thank you.
All right, and as a reminder, if you would like to make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon. And now moving on to our first caller. Caller, please state your name, affiliation, and comment.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, fantastic. This is Craig Sundstrom with Amazon Web Services Public Policy Team. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to participate today and the discussion here this afternoon. By way of background, in 2019, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge, a commitment to be net zero carbon across our business by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. In this process, Amazon has become the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy and is on a path to powering operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. Amazon is committed to developing carbon-free deliverable capacity in California that can serve its substantial and growing load across the state and supports the CAISO's goal to cost-effectively decarbonize the power grid while maintaining system reliability. Amazon has already executed long-term power purchase agreements for projects in California and intends to enter additional PPAs in California to cover the resource adequacy obligation of the load-serving entities that serve our load. Amazon has actively participated in the IPE stakeholder initiative, and we certainly appreciate CAISO staff's partnership in addressing the concerns with the original proposal. Much progress has been made to confront the challenges facing the current process. However, the manner in which transmission plan deliverability, or TPD, would be allocated to interconnection customers still raises concerns for us, and we requested the board either not approve this aspect of the IPE initiative or otherwise hold it for further study. We maintain that CAISO should treat corporate power purchase agreements the same as those held by LSEs for purposes of qualifying to receive TPD allocation, so that the capacity resources Amazon and others are enabling in the market can provide valuable reliability resources for California customers. As highlighted in our letter submitted to the Board of Governors today, the proposed concerns that RA would not end up with entities with an RA obligation, we believe are unfounded. Off-takers without an RA obligation are already economically incentivized to ensure that the value of the RA capacity is realized, meaning that the RA capacity will end up in an LSE's portfolio. To the questions raised in the discussion just a few minutes ago on RA procurement, I would share that while the final proposal put forward by CAISO staff includes a manner for non-LSE off-takers to receive TPD allocation, the proposal, we believe, is far too prescriptive to be workable for any non-LSE off-taker. The current proposal appears to contemplate a formal resale agreement by the off-taker of the RA to an LSE for a minimum number of years. That would rule out the prospect of a corporate off-taker like Amazon using its resource adequacy to self-supply RA for its own load. If a corporate off-taker wished to enter into an agreement to resell its RA to an LSE, it is unlikely that a corporate off-taker would find a willing LSE buyer ahead of the TPD allocation process. Because a project with a non-LSE off-taker would only be eligible for allocation after projects contracting directly with an LSE, it seems unlikely that an LSE would speculate on an RA resale agreement when it can simply contract directly with a project eligible for Group 1. The prospect of a corporate entity even being able to make use of what the CAISO proposes, we believe, seems unlikely. The CAISO's desire to ensure that RA qualifying resources go to entities with an RA obligation can be accomplished without the imposition of a prescriptive solution that interferes with corporate procurement and important policy objectives within CAISO and the state of California. The need for new fully deliverable capacity in California has never been more urgent. Thank you.
Questions from Sundstrom? Yes, Severin.
Hi, Craig. Severin. Your argument has a certain appeal to it, but it did arrive this morning. Can you tell us why you waited till this morning to file this letter?
Yes, sorry, I was fumbling over the mute button there. No particular reason other than I don't believe that we were necessarily aware of the opportunity to comment in this particular forum until a few days ago. We worked as expeditiously as we could to get the letter together and over to you. Certainly, we have been filing comment within the stakeholder process since the beginning, and certainly apologize for any oversight we may have had in delivering the letter a bit late.
Well, I would not say a bit late. I would say completely irrelevantly late. Just to be clear, there's a process here, and the last stop is with the Board of Governors. And we have to consider a lot of issues, and that's why we get briefings well in advance. You aren't the only entity, but you certainly are the last entity that sent us a letter in very tight time beforehand. And I'm just trying to figure out whether we need a rule that just says letters arriving less than a week in advance just won't be considered, or which I don't want to do. But on the other hand, whether your argument is a good one or not is not something I think I feel comfortable evaluating in real time during a Board of Governors meeting. The Board of Governors meetings would last for days on each subject, if that's the case. And I haven't even read your letter. I've been in meetings all day today. So I'm just trying, as my words may indicate, pretty frustrated with the general practice of sending letters 48 hours, 72 hours, in your case, 6 hours before an issue is going to be considered. We have many times, I have many times, and I think other board members said we are available to talk to stakeholders. We do talk to stakeholders frequently. And yet we keep getting these letters that arrive over the transom with a time span that doesn't really allow us to evaluate them and raise issues that, if something changed in the last 3 days and up till a week ago you thought you were all on board with the proposal, and only in the last week did it occur to you that you're not, that would be one thing. That's clearly not what happened here with any of the letters we've received. And so while I'm inclined to think we want to consider every possible angle here, I'm also inclined to think that this process just isn't going to work if people come in hours before a vote and say, here's a whole new argument you should be considering. And we don't have time to even read the letter, let alone seriously evaluate it.
Any other questions?
I don't know if Craig has any answers to that.
I suppose I hear you loud and clear. I suppose my only answer might be that for us, it's not a new argument. It's the same argument that we have made. I do understand your position that it's a new argument for the board, and we will definitely be taking that into consideration going forward.
I know I'm sort of browbeating you about this, but allow me to browbeat everyone who has sent us these letters. We are very available. Don't come in 48 hours in advance. If you think you're going to object, let us know. You're much more likely to get a positive hearing of your thoughts if you let us know in time to actually think about them.
So, Craig, can I ask you a question? Okay, we're in this phase one. I think Neil and Bob have done their best to give us a proposal that we can move forward on, because the feeling is this needs to be moved forward on. There will be a phase two, my understanding is, Neil, right, in the fall?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so my question is, it feels like this issue could have warranted a lot more discussion, particularly since the market's changing rapidly and we want to be responsive and competitive. I'm wondering, from your perspective, if we move ahead today, does that unduly affect you? Or could it be that in the phase two, more of your issues could be addressed and we would understand them better?
If I may, I would like to call on our regulatory counsel, who would probably be a bit better positioned to respond to the procedural question. I believe Bill Kissinger is on the line as well.
Bill is not on the line.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just then do my best to say that I think further consideration of the issue we do think is warranted. I can't at this moment speak to the particular impact of moving forward today, other than our stated position that we've included in the docket over the last few months, and certainly in comments today.
Craig, if I may, can you please walk us over a project and tell us why you, as the off-taker, and I assume Amazon has an RA obligation, what that RA obligation looks like, and if you do not receive what you're asking for today, how that would specifically, and I think Mary raised that issue too, how that would specifically disincentivize you from going towards storage as part of your decarbonization obligation to 100% renewable energy by 2025. I'm trying to find out where that connection and disconnect occurs.
I'm sorry, I'm not. So on this question again, I believe I just confirmed that Bill is on the line, and I know that he has specific expertise on that particular issue.
Hi,
okay, it does. I mean, Bill answering the question is great. That's fine too.
Yeah, there's Bill. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, board, for allowing me to pivot to Bill. I appreciate that.
Governor Galita, I didn't hear your question because I was frantically typing, saying I'm here. So if you could ask the question.
Right. So from a procedural point of view and from a practical point of view, walk us through an Amazon project and how having RA and deliverability goes hand in hand and doesn't need to be disconnected from you and specifically assigned ahead of time to an LSE, and then make the leap in connecting the dots for us, how if you do not have that RA deliverability recognized, it's going to disincentivize you from going forward with storage projects alongside the other resources that you have as part of your commitment to a carbon-free Amazon by 2025.
Terrific. Thank you for asking that question. Before getting to it, let me just say a couple sort of opening comments. First off, the ISO staff has run a great stakeholder process here, and I want to give credit to Bob Emmons and Neil Millar, who have been receptive. We have spoken with them on multiple occasions. They have refined the proposal, and they have tried very hard to make it work for Amazon. So I want to start with that observation. The problem with the proposal is it's very well tuned to deal with off-takers that are load-serving entities. And load-serving entities, in the way that they procure capacity, necessarily finance their projects looking at the whole package of the project, both its capacity value and its energy value, and they can do that at the very outset. The problem is the market is changing, and Amazon and many corporate off-takers are looking to develop projects and bring new capacity to California. They don't have an RA obligation, so they don't need to have deliverability from a regulatory perspective. But there is value to that capacity. And Governor Bornstein's question was or observation early on was exactly the right one in raising the issue of scarcity. There is and there will be scarcity. And so being high on the priority level is critical to projects ultimately being able to obtain deliverability. The value of the capacity in the market of scarcity that we currently have in California makes that the larger value proposition portion of the contract or of having the contract for corporate off-takers like Amazon. They don't need the RA, but because of its value, they can monetize it, they can use it in some fashion to help finance the project. And so unlike a load-serving entity which has need for the RA, which finances the project on the basis that they're going to use that RA, for a corporate off-taker like Amazon, they can take that RA and they can apply it to as part of the value proposition that they bring to their load-serving entities. And Amazon has dozens of load-serving entities. It has an enormous amount of load. That load is growing in the state. It is served by all manner of load-serving entities in the state, ranging from IOUs to direct access providers to CCAs. And its intention is to do a variety of different transactions whereby it would provide RA to the load-serving entity to put in the load-serving entity's supply plan that RA. And so in that sense, they will put the RA into the portfolios or into the supply plans of their load-serving entities, or if not their own load-serving entities, if they have excess RA, then to some other load-serving entity. Governor Goleta, you asked the right question when you said, why would a party that has RA, that doesn't need it itself, hold on to it? And that's exactly right. The intention would be to take that RA and to find the value in it. And to the question then of now tracing of a contract to how that RA will be used, Amazon looked hard at developing projects in California, particularly storage, in order to achieve its goals as part of the commitment that it made to reach 100% renewable energy by 2030, which is on track 5 years early to achieve. And it came to the conclusion that the best means by which to do that was to develop projects which would have FCDS because of the value associated with that deliverability. So from Amazon's perspective, this is a means by which to most economically develop new capacity and projects to meet its renewable objectives. And from the perspective of the state, it seems to be a win-win proposition because it's bringing on more capacity into the state, which it sorely needs. And from Amazon's perspective, not doing so, not being able to develop projects with deliverability, is going to make it much less likely that it will pursue this particular strategy by which to achieve its goals. There are other ways to do it. It could acquire RECs. It is worried about it's very worried that by going forward with projects on an energy-only basis, they won't pencil out. They won't. Not having that capacity value just doesn't make it economically viable. And so it goes back to the question then of, well, how likely is it that these projects will get deliverability if they're in the lower tiers of priority? And our judgment is that by being lower in their lower groups, it's much more unlikely that we will get deliverability. And so that puts us in a proposition where we have to look back at our strategy and decide maybe a different approach is necessary. We don't want to do that. And so that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Governors, this is Mark Rothater. Can I chime in here and try to help this along?
Yeah, it's just because we're well past the time window.
Yeah.
For this.
So let me just say, for the most part, I don't disagree with anything Mr. Kissinger said, and I think we've tried to create both the mechanism that the deliverability gets in the hands of the resources that are moving forward, and a vehicle for effectively transferring that to load-serving entities in the case of a corporate customer. So I think we've tried to do that. There is timing aspects of it, and I think there are some concerns about that, but we've tried to accommodate that. Being that there's concerns remaining on this topic, we're prepared to do as Governor Leslie described and separate this and take this into phase 2. I don't think we're going to significantly change from where we are at, but we will give it more time and we will give it more consideration, and we will take it under consideration and listen to the concerns and see if we can get to a different place. The fundamental concerns remain, but we can do that and we can take it under phase 2. The only risk by taking it under phase 2 is that it keeps the door open of the possibility that projects are taking up space that are not ultimately going to move forward and ultimately getting into the hands of deliverability into the hands of load-serving entities. I guess we'll accept that risk. We can accept that risk for this period of time between phase 1 and phase 2.
That's great, Mark. Thank you so much. And I know, Severin, you have your hand up. I just wanted to say that the last message that we want to be sending out to the community is a chilling effect on projects that are actual real projects with steel in the ground, combined with storage, serving large entities like Amazon, to be put on a second burner, and even worse, replaced with RECs and not real projects. So to the extent that we don't send that chilling message, that would be very useful.
Yeah, we were not trying to send that chilling message, and in fact, we tried to create the vehicle for that to be clear so that that did not happen. I just want to be clear. It's not that the Amazon situation would be the lowest priority. We created the mechanism for them to be still in the top priority. It's just we need to understand that there is an agreement and a vehicle that the deliverability was getting in the hands of the load-serving entity. That's all we were trying to achieve.
And it's Neil here. I should clarify that what we would be talking about pulling into phase 2 is the specific issue of the corporate PPA being treated differently than a PPA with a load-serving entity. We still would want to move forward with the TPD allocation process revisions, because those will be applied in December of this year. And if we don't get that approved at this time, we would not have that new sequencing available. As it is, what this means is by moving the corporate PPA issue into phase 2, is that corporate PPAs would qualify in the December allocation. Phase 2 will not give us time to revisit the issue and get something in place for December of this year. So that's, just to be clear, that's what we're talking about, is pulling the delineation of corporate PPA from any other PPA. But we would still look at having the rest of the reallocation priority of the new group A, B, C, D put in place.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay.
Trevor, do you think?
Well, I will just note we haven't heard all the comments yet.
That's what I was going to say. Let's move on to the next comment.
There's going to be another one that is not going to like what Neil just said. I had a comment on Bill's comment and the way allocating deliverability rents would differ if we did it this way, but it's in the weeds and the sort of thing I would love to have a discussion about before the board meeting with the Amazon folks.
Okay, can we go to the next comment?
Okay, moving on to our next caller. And our caller, state your name, affiliation, and then comment.
Hello, this is Susan Schneider from Phoenix Consulting. I'm representing the LSA today. I'm not sure if I want to wander into this after that discussion. But I do want to just maybe first of all, also echo the praise of the staff. Bob and his team did a fabulous job on this stakeholder process, and we made actually several suggestions early on in the issue paper stage that were accepted into this initiative, including the simplification of the TPD allocation sequencing and some other issues. So we're very grateful to the staff for entertaining that and being open-minded. So I do want to say that before I get into anything else. I guess if you're willing to take the issue of the 3-year term also into phase 2, I may not have to waste your time on that today, and that may be very related to Amazon's point as well, which we actually do agree with it also. Now I'm just wondering. I guess the other process thing I want to say is that the reason you get these letters at the last minute is because we have to wait to see what the final staff proposal is to the board, and that's when the board documents are posted. And so as I know we came in first out of the 5 letters here, but still we had to wait and see what the final proposal was before we could get our resources together and put a letter together and process that for all the LSA members. So if the final proposals that we knew were going to the board were available a little earlier, and this was actually available a little sooner, then we would have time to put something together for you sooner. So notwithstanding Dr. Bornstein's offer to meet with people separately, which you may be careful, maybe should be careful what you ask for, which we'd be willing to do. But that is sometimes why you get letters very, very late in the process. It's just we have to react to the staff proposal. So I probably have like 1 minute left. So the only thing I want to say here is actually a little bit of an extension of Amazon's point as well, which is if a project, first of all, extending Neil's statement earlier, some projects the RA value is a bigger part of the value proposition for a project than others. And as he mentioned, for standalone solar, standalone wind, the RA value is much less than it used to be, maybe half of that, and going down over time. So it is often possible, or sometimes possible, depending on the load serving entity requirements, to actually be able to sell a project more as energy only and then have the RA value be something that maybe the off-taker doesn't need. Or it's just not as, it's because of the uncertainties where sometimes off-takers want guarantees of RA value. That's more difficult today because the CPUC is in the middle of a big regulatory process that could completely change the way these things are counted. So the long-term guarantees that LSEs might have wanted before are much more difficult. And since it's a lesser part of the project value, it's sometimes the resource adequacy is sold separately from the RPS value and the energy of the project. So that's not unusual. It's not unusual to have RA only contracts. Storage contracts are almost always RA only. And then the storage, the project operator is responsible for bidding the project into the market and taking any energy arbitrage or other value that comes from the project. Often the off-takers only want the RA value and they don't want the rest of the project. So the market is evolving, and the CAISO has been very, very successful actually at creating a market where RA is freely traded. It's a fungible product. And so the idea that you would have a 3-year RA contract or a 1-year RA contract, and then once it expires, not offer the RA out in the market is just somewhat, it's a little absurd. I mean, the RA is very valuable. It is running out in many areas, as it's been discussed here, and so it's very difficult to see why, for such a valuable attribute, even if PPA expires, that the developer would not offer that out into the market on either a short-term basis or try to get another contract. You can buy RA for 3 months at a time now. You can buy RA for 1 month at a time. There are ways to do that. It's not the most transparent market because there's no central capacity market here, but it's possible to do it. A project that is an RA project that is taking a planned outage is required to get substitute capacity, and that's not a long-term contract. That's something they might need for a month. or less even. So the CAISO has done a really good job of creating this market, and they have no, we've asked several times during the stakeholder process, and there were no examples cited of any entity that was withholding RA from the market, that was not offering RA that they had available. So we see this as a little bit of a solution in search of a problem here. The market is doing fine. It's not really necessary for the CAISO to insert itself into how long contracts are that are executed when regulators for procurement already do that. And so in the absence of any real problem here, we don't really see that the restriction is necessary. So I guess I'll leave it at that and see if anyone has any questions. And like I said, if we can push this into phase 2, I'm not sure we'll get a different result, but we'll try to get you a letter earlier, I promise.
Evan, you have a question?
Well, first I have a response to Susan. I appreciate that, and I think you're right. We should push staff to get out their proposals earlier. But I also think that you know what the arguments are long before staff puts out their recommendation. And so having a letter ready to go, given I suspect the recommendations are not surprises when they come out.
Well, we always hope that they will see reason at the end, but that's a fair point.
but I'm trying to make sure that the CAISO board is not a rubber stamp, that we actually have an opportunity to understand the issues from both sides, because we do get individual briefings from staff, and then we get these letters at the 11th hour saying, no, wait, there's a whole different way of thinking about it. Separately, I think there really is an interesting issue here. Deliverability is a scarce resource, and we are giving it away for free based on priority. And there's an interesting issue. It may be the case that nobody has ever withheld RA, but there are rents associated with that deliverability. And this is a longer discussion, but I think the way those rents get allocated between producers and customers is affected by how whether that is part of the upfront contracting process or something that is sold in an aftermarket. And I don't propose to have that sort of detailed economic discussion right here, but I am happy to meet with you or the folks from Amazon and talk that through at some point soon.
Okay, well, certainly there are different ways that TPD can be, that deliverability can be allocated, but understand that the reason that people build projects is so they can serve customers. So we understand that the ratepayers are paying for this capacity, and it's a lot. The reason it's running out is because in the transmission planning process they don't look at the entire queue. They only and why would you? I mean, you're not going to build 200 gigawatts of resources, so we understand that would be ridiculous. But it's a much smaller number, and so as the queue gets bigger, you're getting the scarcity is becoming more scarce, more severe. And so we know that there are other ways to allocate this. PPAs were considered a viability measure and still are to a large degree, but and we'd be happy to talk about that. But for purposes of this, here where we're looking at just this one thing, we just didn't see that this restriction was necessary.
Neil?
So it's Neil here. Yeah, so in the sake of time, we can also give the same treatment for this 3-year minimum term that we just proposed for the corporate contracts, which is to defer that item and that component in discussion to phase 2. And I think that will trigger a larger discussion in phase 2 about if the PPAs actually hold any merit in prioritizing who gets assigned deliverability. Because, this was the very issue we were addressing. As we keep softening the requirements, eventually everybody qualifies in the first tier anyway. So if everybody's in the first tier, there's no need for a second, third, or fourth. But we will take this issue on in the phase 2 discussion. We would still like to move forward allocating out the deliverability changes that we're proposing, because otherwise we go into this fall with the older and clearly out-of-date requirements. So this would still be a big step forward, and we will continue this discussion in phase 2 about the contract term as well. Would that help move this forward?
I think it will, Neil, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you for your flexibility. And yeah, that's actually, I think a longer discussion is clearly in order, because I think Severin in particular obviously has thoughts about how we should be allocating this resource. So he can certainly be part of that discussion.
Well, thank you, Ash, and thank you, Neil. And I don't want to micromanage. It's not the board's position to be micromanaging. We're here for policy. I just want to make sure that we do have the chance to get a briefing on the flexibility of RA. Obviously, RA is an important product, and I'm curious to know what the concerns are. Are we worried about RA being sold to another geographic area and it's not connected to the transmission or transmission constraint we're talking about? The short-term RA that's necessary for 1 month or 2 months, the flexibility of trading it and how that may be affected. So a briefing for the board so we can have a better understanding and make better policy decisions would be helpful. Thank you. And thank you for deferring the item. That's helpful.
Mary, you're muted.
I just want to thank Neil for his flexibility, and I think what this is really about is that an appreciation for a market signal we have now sent in California, right? That we are going to need 120 gigawatts of new power, right, in the next 2 decades. So I just think that we're trying to appreciate how the old way and the new way might what it might look like, because I think that the appreciation for how many players are now out there and competing is quite high, and I'm not sure we have exactly the design that goes with that. How's that? But thank you.
Jen, do you have something? Or?
Yeah, just very quickly, Neil, thank you very much. I just wanted to add that in light of the comments that were made by our Amazon speakers, this concept of severing and selling the resource adequacy component after 1 year to someone other than a traditional, what I'll call load serving entity in California, now has opened the door wide. So I will be very interested in understanding, is that a real thing, and where would that go? And does it stay in California, or is it now potentially on the market all over? Because we always have to go back to square one. And remember, we're talking about expanding the California transmission grid at the expense of California customers, ratepayers. So we do have to remember that obligation and try and figure out how we're doing it, and are we addressing it appropriately and charging the right people for the costs and meeting our objectives. Thank you.
Let's go to the next public comment.
Okay, moving on to our next one. Caller, if you can please state your name, affiliation, and then comment.
Hi, this is Eric Eisenman with PG&E. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
I'm actually terrified to address you after this discussion, but I'll try anyway, and I'll keep my comments short and benign. So first on the little process matter that Severin's brought up and that Susan discussed, I think I've got some ideas how to deal with that. I don't want to take time now, so I'll work with the staff on that, and maybe Susan, you and I can talk as well, and the Amazon folks. So subsequently, first, thanks to the CAISO team for their good work on this initiative, to Bob and everyone. I can't emphasize enough the importance of this initiative, both the phase one that you're going to vote on today, or what's left of phase one, and the phase two. So, generally PG&E supports the phase one enhancements. They'll have an immediate positive impact this year on the interconnection queue. The recommended enhancements to the queue process will help manage the volume of projects in the queue, which in turn will aid in moving resources more efficiently and effectively through the queue to timely resource interconnection. I want to call your attention in the board memorandum, page 8, section 9, allowing for interconnection customers to make modifications to their park projects. The memorandum says, quote, this proposal provides interconnection customers with more flexibility to make necessary changes while parked without subjecting the ISO and transmission owners, such as PG&E, to unnecessary studies for a project that may make significant changes or withdraw based on the next deliverability allocation results, unquote. Well, PG&E hopes the CAISO is correct that unnecessary studies will not come about due to this change. But with that said, we would ask the CAISO management to work with us and as needed with other transmission owners over the next year or 2 or 3 to evaluate whether modifications to these park projects do indeed not result in unnecessary studies. Needless to say, our team at PG&E is hypersensitive to unnecessary studies because there's been a lot of them in the interconnection process. So if we do see this change resulting in unnecessary studies, we would ask that this change be revisited. And with that, I would ask that the board approve the phase 1 proposal. Thanks for your time.
That makes sense, Eric. Keep your eyes up. Thank you. Next comment? Unless actually any questions for Eric? Yeah. Next commenter.
That was our last comment.
Okay. That may have been a new record on length of time spent on an item. In my 12 years on the board, at least. Okay. Anything else, or are we ready for a motion? And Roger, good luck on phrasing the motion.
You guys are testing me today, but I got you. I have a good support team. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approve interconnection process enhancements phase 1 as described in the memorandum dated May 4, 2022, and as modified to defer until phase 2 the extent to which corporate PPAs qualify for the first deliverability allocation group, and whether the ISO should specify a minimum term for qualifying PPAs at the May 12, 2022 general session meeting of the Board of Governors. And move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal as described, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Ready for a motion?
I'll move it.
For a second.
Angelina was first. I believe Governor Leslie was second. Governor Bogwat, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Governor Leslie.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Excellent job, governors. The motion passes as modified.
And I want to reiterate, really thank you, ISO staff, for your flexibility on this. It is very much appreciated. Next item, Neil and Bob do not get to go anywhere. So the briefing on summer loads and resource assessment.
So unfortunately for the Board of Governors, we're back. The good news is that this is not a decision item. However, so leading into that, before I turn it over to Bob to walk through this year's summer assessment, I do need to provide some upfront qualifiers and clarifications. So first off, the summer assessment that you're about to be presented on is an annual product that is primarily focused on providing an operational assessment, both to our own operations staff as well as operations staff throughout the industry, especially focused on a year-over-year comparison of how circumstances are changing compared to the prior year. This type of year-over-year comparison, drilling down into what kind of risks would occur, what's driving them, and what the risks would look like, has really shaped both the analysis and the metrics that are used over the past 10 years or so as we've moved into this type of approach. The one downside with that approach is that it does not readily benchmark against the planning metrics that are generally used looking at in processes like the integrated resource planning process at the CPUC for planning purposes. So we did recognize this year that that is a gap, that our ability to crosswalk the summer assessment that's based very close to the start of the summer against an annual metric looking at are we achieving longer term planning goals is not straightforward. And that is something we want to address and deal with in future years. But this process still focuses primarily on that near-term operational assessment comparing this year to last year. Are we getting better? What kind of conditions are we facing? As opposed to benchmarking if the integrated resource planning resources are on the right track or not. We do participate in the CPUC's integrated resource planning process, and our own analysis there has also shaped a few comments we've built into the summer assessment to provide some comparison. But I do need to be clear about the difference in purpose, the difference in some of the methodologies, and the difference in the metrics, just to draw a finer point on that. I also wanted to be clear and reiterate Elliot's earlier comments that new resources have been getting added to the grid, considerable new resources. We are in better shape overall because of that new capacity than we were last year, notwithstanding that there is an increase in load growth. At the same time, we do not believe, when I mentioned those longer-term planning metrics, we do not believe we are yet achieving the resources to deliver a 1 in 10 planning assessment result, 1 in 10 loss of load expectation based on that traditional industry metric for resource planning. And we also have to recognize that, as Elliot mentioned, there are additional more extreme events that have been emerging of late that go beyond the type of conditions we normally have to consider in our resource planning and in our operational preparedness. And that includes both these more disruptive weather events, as well as issues like supply chain issues that are affecting the delivery of new resources to the grid. So those are the kind of issues that have to really be addressed outside of the probabilistic analysis. So I did just want to clarify both what's in this assessment, but also what is not, and hopefully that'll help as we move through the analysis itself. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob to walk through the summer assessment itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for that, laying down the groundwork or the background behind this and what it is and what it's not. So for the last 2 years, the ISO has been doing both a probabilistic or stochastic analysis that provides probabilistic results. We've been doing that for a number of years now, but last year we also incorporated a stack analysis so that we were able to look at this from a couple different ways, both on a probabilistic analysis of what's the probability of reaching various levels of low operating reserve margin, and also what does it look like to actually serve what we believe is really the worst hour of the summer season. What are our capabilities during that particular hour? So the deterministic stack analysis for September, when conditions are most challenging due to declining solar and hydro conditions, and that analysis is based on the Energy Commission's load forecast for 2022. Where the stochastic analysis, where we run 2,000 scenarios, those scenarios are based on an ISO level forecast where we actually forecast on an hourly basis for every hour across the summer, and then do that for 140 different scenarios or profiles of generation based off of 20 years of historical weather data. And that is also coupled with historical renewable resource generation profiles. And then each of the 2,000 scenarios incorporate an import limit to characterize the declining availability of imports as the ISO's load levels increase. And this is to simulate declining imports as temperatures increase in the ISO as well as across the West, to demonstrate that what we've seen in the past, as loads raise across the West, imports typically go down into the ISO. So next slide, thank you. So this is the stack analysis. And This chart shows both the analysis for 2021 as well as for 2022 for the maximum RA import scenario. And by looking at this chart, you can understand why we call it a stack analysis, because we are basically stacking up all of the resources that are available, for this case, September at 8 p.m. What resources are truly going to be available for us during that hour to be able to serve load. And along with those stacks that we show for both last year and this year, we have the planning reserve margins, where we've got a 15% planning reserve margin, which has been the historical planning reserve margin for the resource adequacy program. And we also show a 17.5% planning reserve margin, which the CPUC instituted last year for summer 2021, as well as a 22.5% planning reserve margin, which is a margin that some have suggested as being the level of planning reserves that we need to be at to be able to deal with all of the various issues that we're seeing that the ISO system is having to deal with, related to climate change and fires hitting transmission and those type of things. We're seeing that at least it's being suggested that a higher planning reserve margin is required to handle those things. So, and also the planning reserve margins on the bar on the right for 2022 are higher than the planning reserve margins for last year. That is representative of the fact that the CEC's load forecast, the 1 and 2 load forecast for 2022 is roughly 1,000 megawatts higher than last year for 2021. So one thing I want to bring your attention to is as you stack the various resources from the blue of the existing resources, and then the lighter blue existing demand response resources to the green new resources, and then you get into the orange. This is the average resource adequacy imports that are contracted for the month of November, looking at the average over the last 6 years. And then the next group above that, kind of in this coral colored of 2,500 megawatts or so, that is the amount that was procured for 1 year at the highest level of the RE imports that were procured for any September over the last 6 years, for a total of about 8,500 megawatts for that 1 year were procured. So we wanted to take a look at that particular scenario. And looking at that scenario, you can see that for 2022, we meet the 15% planning reserve margin. And if we have those additional imports that were procured in that greatest level of RE imports for the month of September, we're also able to serve a 17.5% planning reserve margin, where last year the 17.5% planning reserve margin was a bit higher than the full imports, and we needed to rely on non-firm energy imports based on the day-ahead market in order to meet the 17.5% planning reserve margin. So you see there is a slight improvement from last year to this year. However, neither of these years are actually to the level where we are able to meet the 22.5% planning reserve margin. And just to kind of cap some of the observations, there's approximately 4,000 megawatts of net qualifying capacity that has been added between June 1 of last year to June 1 of this year. That's the period that we look at year over year for the summer assessment of new capacity that has been added. We want to make sure that we make a cutoff for June 1, because anything that's got a commercial operation date after June 1 starts to become too tentative to really be reliably count on it for the summer period, because CODs become somewhat in flux and delays happen fairly frequently. And also we have a number of 2582 of new net qualifying capacity from September last year to September this year. And that number is based off of at 8 p.m., which does not include the solar generation, because in September there's no solar generation available at 8 p.m. So that's why this particular hour was chosen for the stack analysis. And that number, being that some of the capacity coming online is during the summer period, which is somewhat in flux, that's a fairly tentative number. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So to look at the stochastic analysis, the model assumptions vary only slightly from the stack analysis. But a few things to speak to. The ISO load forecast used for 2022, only 20 years of historical weather data versus last year's load forecast used 26 years of historical weather data all the way back to 1995, where this year we're only going back to 2002 to utilize as the historical weather data set that's fed into our forecast model to develop the various profiles that are fed through the stochastic model. The 20-year history period provides a forecast that more explicitly accounts for the effect of climate change. That's the reason we switched to 20 years. And the load forecast distribution this year contains a larger population of higher loads in 2022 than last year's forecast. So to look at the actual forecast results for 2022, the 1 in 2 and the 1 in 5 load forecasts are relatively unchanged, less than 1% from last year, and generally aligns well with this Energy Commission forecast. Looking at the 1 in 10 forecast with this shorter 20-year weather period, the 1 in 10 forecast is 1% higher than last year and is 4% higher than the Energy Commission forecast. To look at the hydro conditions, we are in the 3rd year of below normal snowpack this year, where as on April 1st, which is the typical year that is the benchmark for comparing year over year, this year we were at 38% of average on April 1st, which compared to last year's 60% of average on April 1st. So while even last year was a drought condition, this year, at least on April 1st, we are in lower conditions than last year. And the Northwest Hydro Reservoir are projected to be at 94% of average. This is a metric that we use to take a look at to see, do we think we'll be at levels of imports out of the Northwest that are close to normal or below normal? And with 94% being pretty close to average, we would expect to see normal imports of surplus energy out of the Northwest into California during the higher load periods. But one thing I do think it's worth pointing out is during discussions with utilities in the Northwest as well as BC Hydro, they are saying that in the last few years they've had record-breaking loads during the summer season, and they attributed that to a greater saturation of air conditioning in the residential sector there. So that could potentially impact the amount of imports that come into California if it's hot in the Northwest at the same time it's hot here. And then finally, for this slide, generation additions are at 3206 megawatts of what we call dispatchable capacity that the market can dispatch to any level throughout the day. And that's again based on June 1 to June 1 of this year, and most of that is from battery energy storage projects. So to look at the actual stochastic model results, this chart here, this table shows the various levels of probabilities of entering into various levels of low operating reserve margins, where this year we're moving to the EEA methodology, and the points that we typically look at year over year are in the EEA 3 category. And these probabilities are based off of what is the lowest 1 hour of operating reserves seen over the entire summer for each of the 2,000 scenarios. So we're only looking at 1 hour in this case. And since the comparison between this year and last year is not quite exactly the same because of the different forecast periods for, or at least the different period for utilizing historical weather data, the comparison between this year and last year are a bit more nuanced and requires us to dig a little bit deeper to make sure we get a full understanding of the impacts, because we have two things playing against each other. One is we've got a significant increase of capacity that came online for the summer, but we also have a forecast that has more scenarios in the higher load levels. So looking at this table for 2022, the first row of EEA 3 threshold, that's the point where we just get into the EEA 3 conditions, where we call in EEA 3. And for this year, we're showing the probability of meeting that reserve criteria is 15.1%. And that compares to last year's at the same point of 6.4%. If you look at the next level down, which is the EA3, where at that point we are now starting to use contingency reserves to serve loads, and we are now utilizing 50% of the contingency reserves are relying on firm load interruptions that have been armed for interruption. So that's a point that's kind of midway in the EA3 criteria. And for that probability for 22, we're seeing 7.7% compared to last year's 4.8%. And if you continue down into continuing to see declining operating reserves to the point where we need to actually interrupt firm load and we have unserved energy, the probability for this year is actually slightly better than last year of 4%, where last year was 4.6%. So even though we have, in some cases, we may see ourselves being in conditions where we might see ourselves calling more warnings based on the results of this year, where we're actually getting into an EEA warning, the actual probability of getting into unserved energy where we're actually needing to shed firm load has declined. And to look at some of the more modeled results, this shows the number of hours of risk for load shedding is significantly reduced for 2022. And if you look at this first row within this table of the comparison results of last year to this year, looking at the number of megawatt hours of unserved energy for all 2,000 scenarios, between 2021 to 2022, we're actually seeing a very significant 84% reduction. And looking at the number of hours of unserved energy across all 2,000 scenarios, we're seeing a 71% reduction. So the difference between this data and the prior slide's data is, on the prior slide, we were just looking at the one worst hour for each scenario, where this data looks at all of the hours of each scenario to see how many hours we actually have unserved energy. And another way to put this in context, last year's data, if you looked at the worst scenario, it had 25 hours of unserved energy within that one scenario, where this year's scenario, the worst case hour is only 6 hours of unserved energy. And that puts us in a situation where even though some scenarios and some hours have enough unserved energy that operations really doesn't have any tools to deal with, the operations does have some tools to deal with these lower operating reserve margins that in some cases could actually save off actually having to interrupt firm load in some of the scenarios. This chart is a way of looking at what are the hours that we're seeing kind of the worst case conditions arise. And the blue bars in this chart show the worst 1 hour of all 2,000 scenarios, where that worst 1 hour has an operating reserve margin of 6% or less. And so you see the distribution across what those hours occurred. And we also add to this chart the solar generation profile that we would expect to see at time of peak or a peak day. And this demonstrates that 81% of the low minimum reserve margins occur during hours ending 1900 to 2100. And these are hours of little to no production from our solar resources. So this chart helps demonstrate what are the hours that we're really most at risk, as well as demonstrates the hours what we have to work on to bring on new resources in the future, so that those resources are able to serve load during these hours and reduce the risk that we see currently during these hours. So some of the things that Neil brought up earlier in his remarks, this slide shows that the ISO analysis does not fully reflect some of the more extreme climate-induced load and supply uncertainties and procurement delays, risks that we see on the horizon. You know, some of these more extreme events are extreme weather events beyond those projected within the most 20 years of historical data. So time will tell exactly, is it going to be more frequency of more extreme events, or are those extreme events going to actually be more extreme? That's a bit of an unknown at this point. Wildfire events that could limit key transfer paths or resources and other potential transmission outages are not modeled within our model. That would just make this model too complex, and it would take a month to run a model that would actually take in those type of issues into account. Also, an unexpected confluence of extreme heat, drought affecting fire risk, and smoke impacting solar production is something that we're seeing more of, and we saw the issue of smoke impacting solar production back in 2020 during the extreme heat event. And with the high probability of ongoing wildfires in California, it could be something that we're continuing to see even this summer. Projected development delays such as those triggered by recent Department of Commerce investigation of solar panel tariff issues is something that we're seeing not necessarily for this summer, because the resources coming on this summer we're very confident they're going to make it. However, this could play out as soon as summer 2023 and beyond 2023. So it's an issue that we need to be following closely and doing what we can to try not to let this issue delay projects. And finally, these types of events tend to be managed in part by additional reliability measures beyond normal resource planning and market operations. So moving to the conclusions slide, overall 2022 capacity conditions are better compared to 2021 due to new resources, especially storage resources, and despite load changes in hydro conditions. But the grid does remain vulnerable to high loads and availability of imports during widespread heat events, especially in late summer. While progress has been made in overcoming past supply shortfall conditions this summer, additional resources are needed in future summers to ultimately achieve the long-term reliability margins we strive for. And finally, conventional planning techniques do not take into account growing risks of more extreme events stemming from climate change, supply chain disruptions, and so forth. So these pose additional risks that are not included in these analysis results. So that ends my presentation. Are there any questions?
It's Neil here. I think there was just one issue that Bob addressed that I just wanted to draw a finer point on as well right up front, which is that, as I mentioned, the metrics that we use were basically those developed over years to try to help inform the operations perspective. One of the unintended consequences this year of shortening the number of years of history we used in the analysis was, while it continued to demonstrate through most of the metrics the improvement led by the additional resources that are added to the grid, reducing the number of years of history that was used had the bit of an unintended consequence for the metrics that we use of making it look like there's a higher risk of moving into operating reserve shortfall conditions. That's not reflective of an actual shift in risk. That's a shift in the history we were using in the assessment. And that's something we'll need to do more homework on to try to weed out that kind of anomaly going forward. But that doesn't, like I said, indicate that we're at more risk than last year. It's a reflection of the change of the amount of history we were using that was trying to capture more current data. So aside from that anomaly, the rest of the metrics, both in the deterministic analysis as well as the probabilistic analysis, show that we are moving the right direction. We are adding more resources than are impacted by load growth, so the direction's moving positively. But as I said at the beginning, we don't believe we're yet achieving at the level where we're achieving a 1 in 10 planning target from an event per year assessment. And we also do have to pay attention to these other emerging risks that are not traditionally baked into this type of analysis.
Thank you, Neil. Those are good points. Presumably, the change in 26 to 20 years, moving forward, if we stick with 20, the year-on-year evaluation will work. So it's just a 1 year off. I have a question. How many resources are we planning on having come online between now and September 1? Like, is that baked into your analysis that new stuff is coming online, or is it pretty much we have what we have now?
No, there are additional resources coming online. I should know this. I believe it's about 1,500 megawatts are still due to come online between now and September 1st.
Okay, and we're counting on those.
Yes, and I'm just doing a rough math of the difference between what we're expecting by June 1st versus July 1st, and I think that's by July 1st we're looking at, I think it's about 1,500 megawatts. The reason that's a kind of a large number is that most of those resources were aiming for June 1 to be online for the full summer.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have taken small schedule hits that are pushing them back a month or two and into the summer.
Okay.
I don't think anyone targeted a July in-service date, but now we're looking at resources that were pushed off the June 1st target and are now looking in July. So it's about 1,500 then.
And to be clear, those resources were not in the stochastic analysis. So that will just be additional benefit to the system if they do make it online by a time where we have some potential extreme events occur.
Were they in the stack analysis?
We did include them in the stack analysis.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Severin.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the more extreme climate threats, which are mentioned on slide 8, but if I understand right, none of the probabilistic analysis accounts for those. They're just mentioned as additional risks. And I'm wondering, I mean, I understand these are all very difficult to quantify, but no quantification at all leaves me sort of wondering what to think.
So it's still here. I'd just like to comment on that because, yeah, we shouldn't have said no extreme weather events are being projected.
No.
And we've been struggling with the words to use. Some of the climate change impacts that can be included in trending, the impacts of temperature and so forth, there is an attempt to bake that into the forecast. So just the escalation in temperature and some of the increased variability that we can try to project off of historical data, we do try to include that. We're also experiencing, though, some really disruptive events that go beyond having any sort of meaningful way to project. And those are the ones that go, like I said, are even more extreme. We hope those do not become a new normal themselves, but those are the kinds of more disruptive events that are more difficult to capture.
Well, I understand that, but I also sort of feel like there are things that we got to get some feel for. I'll give you an example. On September 9th, 2020, a day that those of us in the Bay Area remember well when the sun never rose, the solar output from my friends who have solar on their rooftop was approximately 0. It was really nighttime. But the solar output from CAISO was pretty darn good. And the reason, I was told, was the solar farms are in the Mojave and the smoke didn't get to the Mojave. And one thing I would want to know is that always going to be the case? Is there some sort of meteorological phenomenon that makes it very unlikely that you're going to get smoke buildup over the Mojave, or did we just get really lucky because we would have dropped another 12,000 megawatts or something?
Severin, this is Elliot. I'm going to just weigh in here for just a sec because I think you're asking a really important question. And just in the last few weeks in particular, let's say the last several weeks, there has been a lot of energy within the state agencies and the ISO as well to try to kind of start quantifying some of those risks. As you noted, it's very difficult, right? Not all of them lend themselves in a purely analytical basis, but when you start thinking both short-term and longer-term, for example, the impacts of some of the supply chain delays. What does that mean for cumulative development? Looking at, and there's been some sensitivity analyses run around that. They're looking at the tariff dispute, the DOC, the Department of Commerce. What does that mean in terms of the chilling effect that that's having development? There have been some look backs on say, August 2020 type of temperatures? What would that mean if they manifested themselves now? And there have also been scenarios that have been looked at in terms of transmission outages like we saw last year with the Bootleg fire. So there is some effort right now, a lot of effort to try to put a little bit more of a quantification. And what does that mean for the state planners in terms of additional resources that may be necessary to help us ride through these events that are outside of the 1 in 10 planning criteria? So I would expect you're going to see more of that here in the weeks ahead as the teams try to do a better job of quantifying them.
And I'll just say one more thing. These things are going to happen, and we are going to have transmission go out and so forth. And the one resource we do have is demand response, that if we design it correctly, we can avoid a Texas-style complete disaster and just have a really unpleasant day instead. And unfortunately, in my opinion, California is way behind the curve on that.
Yeah, no, we agree with that, and that's certainly when you look at the contingency planning that's going on within the state, the existing resources that exist, as well as try to build out more of a reserve. DR has to feature prominently in that. Totally agree. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Roger, do we take public comment on briefings? I don't remember.
We have been.
Okay. And let us open it up to public comment.
Once again, if you would like to make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen.
Anyone in the queue, Chris?
And we do not have any callers in queue.
Okay, then let us move on to the next and last item. Decision on retiree medical investment policy exception. Ryan.
Thank you, governors. I'm here today to ask your approval for a temporary exception on a provision in the retiree medical plan investment policy. That provision determines how we annually resize the portfolios based on the actuarial report. And the current language would actually require us to fully liquidate a portfolio this year. However, the numbers that go into those calculations are variable, and we could be forced to have to repurchase that portfolio in a very short amount of time, which is obviously not how we want to manage a long-term investment portfolio. So if you go to the next slide, just have this one slide that I can speak to that'll display the issue. This is a 5-year summary of the medical plan liabilities, and it's how we size the portfolios. If you focus on the first 2 columns here, back at the start of this 5-year period, we had total liabilities of just under $25 million, $24.9 million. The liabilities this is the number that comes from the third-party actuary. There's all kinds of inputs that go into that number and actuary rules as well as accounting rules. And that number tends to be variable and is very sensitive to changes in all the assumptions that go into that. You subtract from that the assets that are held in the trust. We have an employee benefit trust where we put the liabilities that are associated with 2 groups of employees. One, it'd be the existing retirees, and the second group would be the current employees who have reached the eligibility of the plan but have not yet retired. Any liabilities that's of the total associated with those 2 groups of employees is set aside in the trust. And back in 2017, you can see the value of that trust was $11.1 million. You subtract that from the total liabilities, you're left with net liabilities. This ends up on the ISO's balance sheet. And it's how we set the portfolio size of what we call the custody account. Essentially, it's the non-trust account, where we basically just earmarked unrestricted ISO assets and invest them in a different policy, a much more longer-term policy associated with these long-term liabilities. What's happened over the last 5 years, as you can see on the top line here, the liabilities has gone down to about $21.1 million on the far right-hand side of this table. That has gone down for a number of reasons, but primarily just due to some plan design changes that we've implemented in the plan over those years. Some assumptions that go into the actuarial report that are a little favorable right now for the ISO or for the liabilities. as well as just above average investment return during most of this period, and really back to 2013 when we made the change on this investment policy. The assets in the trust, on the other hand, have also gone up. They've gone from 11.1 million to about 21.2 million at the end of 2021. That $10 million growth, about half of that, a little more than half of that is just investment return. The other half was a contribution we made to the trust in 2019 as part of the plan design changes, which increased the eligibility pool at that time. So there's been, as you can see now, if you subtract the value of the trust, it exceeds the value of the liabilities by a small amount, and therefore we would have nothing in the custody account. It would require us to essentially liquidate the final $3 million that's in the custody account this year. However, if we fast forward to the end of 2022, if we just assume that liabilities remain flat at 21 million, obviously the investment performance in the markets up to now has been negative. We're down about 10% year to date in the trust assets. If that were to hold true to the end of the year and that portfolio declined to say 19 million, we would be forced to repurchase $2 million back into the custody account after liquidating $3 million this year. And again, that's not how I'd want to manage a long-term portfolio. So I'm recommending that we approve a waiver, a temporary exception to the resizing provision in the investment policy. I would commit to update you on the status of that waiver when I file the annual investment report, which I do in March of every year. The timing of that works out well. We get the annual actuary report in mid to late February of each year, so we can assess, whether or not that exception needs to remain. Any changes into the exception or a removal of the exception would come back to the board for their decision. That is all I have, and happy to answer any other questions.
Questions? Makes sense to me, by the way. Okay. No questions, then any public comment?
Once again, please press the raise hand icon if you would like to make a comment. And it looks like there are no callers in queue.
I cannot say I'm surprised. Roger, I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves retiree medical investment policy exception. The retiree medical investment policy exception is described in the memorandum dated May 4, 2022. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Governor Bogwat. Second is Borenstein. You were fast there. You were safe at home. And let me just take your vote. Governor Bogwat?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Glitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey?
Aye.
Thank you, governors. It's been a long day, and we have a 5-0 vote. We have approved the motion.
Any questions about the informational reports?
Hi, Ash. This is Stacey Bernard. And just while I have you guys, I did send an unrelated time-sensitive email. So I just wanted to alert you guys to that for support information.
Okay. I assume we can read it after we adjourn.
Absolutely.
Then, hearing no objection, let us be adjourned.
We are adjourned. Thank you, governors. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thanks for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.